Good evening and welcome to the City Council of Easthampton's meeting for August 7th, 2019. We'll begin with the roll call.
Ted Coniff.
Here.
Salem Derby. Omar Gomez.
Here.
JP Kaczynski.
Here.
Bill Lynch.
Here.
Joe McCoy. Tom Peak.
Here.
Dan Rist.
Here.
Owen Zaret.
Present.
I would now like a motion to approve my confirmation as president according to Rule 3.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Let's stand. Pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can you just explain the acting as president?
Oh, okay. So if anybody cares, I'm the acting president because the president and vice president aren't able to attend this meeting. That's for the public at large. We are being videotaped for all of you, so you know that. I would like a motion for the approval of the minutes for July 10th, please.
Second.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain? Thank you. Minutes are approved. Public speak time. If you're here to speak to us, now's your time if it's not for something that's on the public hearing agenda. So you will have opportunity to speak to the cannabis equity, the wage theft ordinance, the bicycles, and the municipal light plant later on in this meeting. Otherwise, you may speak to the council now. Please come to the podium and state your name for the record. Nobody? Okay. Moving on. Communications from elected officials, boards, and committees. I have nothing. Does anyone in the council have anything that they'd like to announce? Mayor committee. Oh, sorry, Councilor Zaret.
Well, I'm like in the spirit of the community participation. A couple of community events that are coming up. Cookout with the Cop on August 22nd, I believe from 5 o'clock till 8, right outside 50 Payson Avenue here. And then we have our wonderful yearly concert series put on by Laudable Production, Mill Pond Live, which starts, I believe, August 24th and runs for 4 weeks.
Thank you, Councilor Zaret.
You're welcome.
Correspondence from, I don't have anything from the President or Vice President. Announcements were made. Mayor communications, Mayor LaChapelle.
If I may, using mayoral privilege, speak very quickly on each one of the public hearings because I have another engagement. I'll have to leave right after mayor communication.
If you could make it brief, you want to get to appointments before 6:15.
I can do it. Okay, so on cannabis equity applications, I again applaud the council for being very forward in the state around this issue, which I believe to be a true issue around fairness. I would ask for consideration that we add 2 licenses if the council is amenable at all to add licenses and keep the 6 until we get clarity from the state on licenses not approved fully. Because we don't know how long an applicant can hang on to a provisional license. So, yes.
Can you tell me, Councilor Zaret was telling me we have 5 already in the pipeline, is that correct?
We do, and they're in various stages of their business plan, so they still all have to come back to us for local approval. What we're trying to do is get clarification from the state on what the state approved so they could start local building and approval. We don't know how long they can stay in that limbo with the state. If they've started building, then you've got a 2-year building permit, and that's clear. So I would want some, consideration. I know the conversation's going to go ongoing, but I wanted to enter that. On the wage theft ordinance, I would somewhat of a emotional, philosophical presentation on this ordinance. I look at it as something that codifies the tradition of the trades of Easthampton. Always fair wage for honest work, no more, no less. Now's the time to codify this tradition, given the needs for jobs in our city and the need for our residents to have good paying jobs and not have to fight against scrupulous employers in construction as well as service industry. An affordable city is one that can offer an assurance that their city government stands for fairness in all. On the bicycle ordinance, it's amazing on how far we came from 2012. I urge clarity around this issue from this council. It's wonderful that people are using other modes of transportation other than cars. And for clear, safe use of those alternate modes, we need clear guidance from this council and with input, of course, from public safety and Mass DOT. That was pretty good, Councilor.
You did.
My
So,
me-
and I take it you're in favor of the municipal light plant as well?
Yes, sir, I
Because we will
am.
be voting on that.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I thought I had already, I'm in.
Mr. Peak was wanting to know.
Yes, I wonder if the lights would have gone out today if we had one.
Well, we wouldn't have lost internet.
That's true. That's great. We could serve. Just Mayor Communications, a couple of updates here. We created an official City of Easthampton Facebook page. The reason why we did it is, one, it's verified as a government page, so folks who are on that page know that it's only the city government that is posting, and it's reliable information. It will also have cross-posts from other verified government, city government pages, state government. The residents and businesses and the press can rely on those posts. A lot of times we're trying to message what's going on in the city, and it'll be picked up by a non-verified Facebook page with resulting comments. And to know that the post is from the city, the press, as well as residents and businesses can rely on the information. It also offers 2 more ways of the public to reach out to the municipal government through direct messages and email directly from the Facebook page to my office for distributing to whatever office needs the information. Also, the departments with less social media traffic can post out via the city page. This is not just for the mayor's office or any one given department, but for use for the city and official. It's also used in conjunction with the website landing page. Thanks to Ashley for updating that. So you're going to see those blue posts on the left that the city uses now to make sure that the information. Next topic, Lower Mill Pond Pump House demolition is complete. We thought we had an environmental issue down there. We do not, and that was checked out by both the contractor as well as our procurement official in the city. We have temporary fencing down there, and it will be capped with concrete, and permanent fencing will be put up as soon as the weather cooperates. And we're starting to look for the grant money to make the ramp to the fishing platform. Until we have the money to have the ramp, there will be still fencing. And it's quite a steep slope. There are no stairs that get up there. But this was really made possible by Lieutenant Governor Polito when she visited, to see just how close we were really to environmental disaster with that pump house. It's great to see it down, and it's just going to be a great fishing pier and just watching the pond. That said, Valley Bike Share is up and running. I do want to let people know that you have to use the app or a fob if you're an annual member, because the kiosks were damaged in transit. We're working on that with the vendor. The press, I just want to point out the Gazette editorial saying Easthampton may have arrived and not just be up and coming. I like that by the time Mass Live came to the city, they were sure we were a destination city just 5 days later. So congratulations to the city in 5 days, just moving right up. And then I would ask you guys to look at TV pieces on WWLP and Western Mass News. There's several of them late, really good things. Is our city planner here?
Yes, he's sitting there, he's trying to hide.
If I could bring him up for my last piece, and it'll be well before 6:15, unless Jeff talks too much. So update on One Ferry, really exciting work down there, and there's been some great posts on the Facebook page. I'm asking Jeff to kind of say what has happened, what's going to happen, and timeline for that project, and a little bit of phasing. As Councilor Derby said a couple of meetings ago, this is a very complicated, slow-moving project, and we really just went fast for it, got it together, And I just want to caution everybody that the rest of the project will not be so fast. And Jeff's going to explain why.
Did you know you were gonna explain why?
No, I didn't. That's okay. So,
Do you want your picture?
yes, actually, that's great. I can do this in 2 minutes. It's taken about 1.5 years to get to this point, so it's an immense project that has a lot of partners. And what we were scurrying around to do is to begin to inform members of our public and people who commute through the area that the private developer is commencing construction on the private development portion of this project. So it's a little bit of, you know, a dam with all this water behind it, and all the pieces of the puzzle have come together, and now the dam is broken and things are moving quickly. So what we were trying to do is just alert people to the act of mobilization. So the project will consist of a couple different phases, but the most outward facing portion of this project is called Building 1. So that's the building that most of us know. It's right on Ferry Street. So that building is subject to be renovated. So that'll be part of this very first phase. Also part of the phase is the building. So yesterday, the developers team took the cupola off of what we're calling Building 3. And so through the permitting process that the developer's gone through, that was required to be preserved. And so while I don't know all the exact details, it's going to be preserved somewhere on the property, something that could be visible and showcased later as part of the history of the property. So that's been removed, and so our expectation is that that Building 3, which is in really poor condition, it's always been slated for demolition, is probably going to be coming down within the next, either tomorrow or by next Monday. Yeah. So, I had put together a little graphic just to let people know that this is really sort of the first phase. What we're trying to alert people is that there will be construction vehicles, there'll be people, there'll be activity in the area. So we're just asking motorists to drive carefully through there. And then we have a team of DPW, police, the fire department, the mayor's office, and the planning department are all beginning weekly meetings with the developer to talk about potential changes in the traffic patterns on Ferry Street. So I'm at the end of my spiel here, but what's going to happen is, because Building 1 is so close to the street, they're going to need to put Jersey barriers, 5 or 6 feet off of the building for a lift to be operating in there for a couple months. So the concept is that the lane shift will happen within the road, the existing Ferry Street. So we are going to see probably in about 3 weeks actual changes to traffic patterns. But between now and then, it's really going to just be a lot of activity down there. So I think that there's probably more, but knowing that there's a room full of people here for public hearing, we can continue to have the dialogue. Is it good?
Good.
Okay.
I might ask you questions after the public hearing.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I would, one, have to thank DPW. Has a lot going on. This is a very busy time of year. We see all of the improvements going on around the city, and they've just been dynamite. Our city engineers, Dan Murphy and Diane Rossini, are top-notch as well. Michael Owens in the finance department, taking care of all of our grants, but this MassWorks grant and reimbursement. At the same time, we're dealing with reimbursements for the school project. He's just amazing. I thank him every time I go by that office, and I would encourage all of you to do it. Jeff has done just an amazing job juggling a lot of contractors and subcontractors and a lot of bureaucratic fun stuff. It's just an amazing team, and working with our consultants and developers has been fascinating and quite honestly a lot of fun, and I think we're going to end up with a great project. So I thank you for all of your support.
I thought of something that I do need you to respond to me for.
Yes.
I believe Councilor Zarrett was going to bring to it, but since you're not going to be here, the wage theft ordinance
Yes.
cannot be used in the school building project or in 1 Ferry Street. because they're grandfathered in as being started beforehand. Am I correct?
Project started before this, project started before the passing of the wage theft ordinance would not fall under that ordinance.
And you've got that confirmed from the state or from someplace? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted everybody to hear that. That's my source as the mayor on that.
And I would ask that the motion be very clear that when the ordinance is passed, that it goes into effect with projects coming at the city under the definition of it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, for
Thank you.
throwing that in. I am going to go a little past 6:15. I hope you'll be patient. I would like to move to standing committees and appointments because we have an important appointment and we'd like to honor that person who is in attendance and not make them wait. So we'll be probably starting in 6:20.
Oh, 6:17.
Oh, so you're just gonna do one and then we'll have a
No.
Counselor
Might be
Khan,
6:20.
appointments.
We had 2 mayoral appointments and we also had 2 city council appointments. I'll do the mayoral appointments first and I will move to the city council appointments. We had Patricia Hawkins for the Telecom Advisory Committee. I was not able to talk to her today, but Tom Peak, Councilor Peak, who was the reason that she applied for that position, he gave me some intel, and so I'll just throw out that she's been very interested in the Telecom Advisory Committee since it was formed. Since they've lost a very technical member from the committee, that Councilor Peak feels they're really lucky to get her on board. She has a very thorough understanding of how the internet actually works, as well as how people interact with it, which is super valuable. So we approved her 2-0, and I will make a motion to approve Patricia Hawkins to the Telecom Advisory Committee with a term expiration 12/31/2021.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Councilor Lynch. Do we have any further discussion? All in favor of the appointment?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you.
The next one was David Jaffe to the Manhan Rail Trail Committee with the term expiration 12/31/2021. I did talk to David. He's a big proponent of the rail trail, uses it almost every day. He's been here 13 years. He came up here from Miami to attend Smith School of Social Work. He's a social worker. He loves the rail trail, and this felt like a natural fit at this point in his life to be more involved in what the city is doing, and I believe he's already attended a couple of meetings and he feels that the group is extremely welcoming and he's really looking forward to participating. I will make a motion to approve David Jaffe to the Manhan Rail Trail Committee with a term expiration of 12/31/2021.
Second.
There's a motion and a second for the appointment. Do we have any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? Thank you. Moving on.
The reason I wanted to go first was because we have the city council appointments for the city auditor and the assistant city auditor, and Hadel Patel I asked her to stay on just if we had any questions around the job or anything else. I took some notes from meeting with her. And I can tell you, Val Bernier is actually taking a day off today, so she wasn't there, but Hadel did a great job of educating us on what an auditor does. One of the things that I really probably should have known and kind of did know, but I wanted to hear it, was how the financial group that handles the actual cash and the auditors, the twain never meets. There's a very solid wall between them. There is no crossing over that barrier, and so it's kind of a check and balance on how accounts payable and revenue, and then how the cash is spent, are very separate. This department involves paying all the bills. There's AP and there's revenue. Val does most of the revenue and Hadel does the AP work. She does a lot of work with the purchase order system. She explained to us that purchase orders heretofore, so about 1.5 years ago, changed. Everything used to go to the mayor for approval. Now it's anything greater than $10,000 goes to the mayor. Everything under $10,000 goes to Michael Owens, who's the procurement manager, which makes things way more efficient and keeps things that are $5 from going into the mayor's office, which I thought was a great idea. She also explained that the job involves ensuring that all of the rules and regulations for the state around how the money and all of the bills are paid and all of that, that's also part of what the auditor does. They make sure that they report to the Department of Revenue, and they make sure that all of our books are up to date. So with that said, does anyone have any questions, or does anybody want to talk to Hadel directly? Have any questions?
This is a reappointment, isn't
Yeah.
Just reappointment.
It is,
She's
yeah.
been here for 3 years.
3 years, yep.
And she have a master in business economic degree.
it? Okay, thank you.
So, if no questions, then you're off the hook, Hadel. I will thank you for staying, by the way. I'll make a motion to approve Valerie Bernier, City Auditor, with term expiration September 1, 2022, and Hadel Patel, Assistant City Auditor, expiration September 1, 2022.
Second.
So we have a motion on the floor for the reappointment of Valerie Bernier and Hadel Patel as our auditing staff. I just want to comment that when our charter was developed, one of the reasons the council appoints the auditing staff is to have that check and balance. And the kind of fence we have between the auditors and the rest of the financial workings of the city is why we appoint them, and they don't answer to the mayor, they answer to us, which is a good way of making sure that finances are kept clear. Do we have any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining, thank you.
Thank you, Hadel. One more thing. I'd like to remove from the agenda the request to review the council's confirmation of mayoral appointments without prejudice, that particular agenda item. And I'd
Well,
like.
let's do that first.
Okay.
That has to be motion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a motion.
Motion to
You're right.
remove without prejudice.
Second.
We're
Request to
removing
review
the
the
council
council's-
confirmation of mayoral appointments review of the procedure. She's requesting that without prejudice, which means we can bring it back at any time. It doesn't have to wait 6 months, because we're not taking any action on it. Do we have any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining? Thank you.
One more thing. I'd like to move the nomination of Deb Lusnia, the Community Relations Committee with the term expiration 12/31/2021, to the appointment committee.
Second.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion on the floor to send to committee Deb Lusnia. Any other discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
One more, Carol Vito, City of Easthampton Collector, term expiration 12/31/2021. Move that also to the appointment committee.
We have a motion, a second, to send the appointment of Carol Vito to the collection position. 2 appointments. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
And our next meeting will be 5:30 on whatever the first Wednesday of September.
September 4th.
5:30 September 4th downstairs.
Thank you.
Thus concludes.
I'd
Thank you,
like a
Mr.
motion to
President.
open the public hearings, please.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion to public hearings. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Um,
I would like to ask Counselor Zaret to introduce the 3 ordinances that are up first. And do you want to go to wage theft first because of all the people here or not?
I don't have an issue with that. No one else from the
Does
city.
anybody object? I would like you to do that.
Okay.
So let's do wage theft first.
If it pleases you, Acting President Riss, may I
Sure.
say something first? I'd like to make a recommendation. If it needs to be formalized in a motion, you can tell me if we need to do that. But we have some pretty weighty ordinances on the public hearing agenda tonight. Certainly both the cannabis equity and the wage theft ordinance, and to a certain degree, the bicycle ordinance as well. These have not yet had the opportunity to be reviewed by our city solicitor. That and the fact that we have 2 counselors who are not present tonight. For myself, I would prefer that certainly we have solicitor review as well as preferably have full council attendance to vote on these. And so I'd like to make a recommendation, if you feel it needs to be in a formal motion, that we discuss these tonight, but with the plan to continue them.
I would ask that you make that motion at the end of the presentation of each one.
Okay.
And just so everybody knows, that means on the first meeting in September, pending attorney review, and we think we'll get it back, which is September 4th, this will be voted on, and you will have another opportunity to speak to it. You will be allowed to speak to it this evening, however, because you all came here, and we certainly want you to have that opportunity. But it will not be voted on this evening. We need to get city attorney review, and we're continuing it. The other thing that I wanted to say personally is I thought there was some urgency to get the wage theft ordinance done because of the possibility of it being included in school building documents. But it cannot be per state law. So there isn't as much urgency because we don't have any other projects other than 1 Ferry Street, which it cannot be used in either. Because these projects are started, we can't add ordinances to them, unfortunately. So when we do vote on it in September, it's not gonna critically impact anything but future projects that may come before us. That's the way it goes. So yes, you will be able to speak to it, but we will be continuing the public hearings at the end of each discussion. So Councilor Zaret, why don't you start with wage theft?
And with your permission, I just want to give a really brief presentation.
Okay.
I feel that Councilor Coniff really
I set the bar
set
pretty
the,
high.
she did set the bar pretty high,
So
and
good
so
luck.
I'm going to probably limbo under the bar, but
Well,
I'll try
as
to.
long as you do it right, and Jeff Bagg is here who knows the technology. If he needs a hand, Jeff, would you mind?
So bear with me while I struggle with the technology here.
Can someone turn the first 5 switches up from the right over off in the lighting, please? Appreciate it.
From the right.
One more. I think,
Oh, that was 5.
well, then I missed one.
I think it's the last, no, that goes on. Yeah, and then put on a couple of other.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good enough. We can see it.
There's my PIN number. Oh,
8627.
thank you.
That's a pretty non-private code there.
It's random. It self-generates
It self-generates
every time
stuff.
you do it.
Oh, really?
I think.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
Hey,
All right, look at that.
You did
Hey,
it.
I didn't struggle that much at all. Thanks everyone for coming. Appreciate members of the public. I believe there are members of the Carpenters Union here. It's always great for any city council meeting to see full chambers. It would be great if we could see this all the time, but I certainly also appreciate people turning out for important moments like these public hearings that we're having. I wanted to briefly echo what the mayor said before regarding Easthampton and where we currently are as a destination city. I think with the robust development that we've seen in the city and all the building and construction that is occurring, we have to be really mindful about the people who are doing the construction. The end results of those projects are not necessarily what matters most. It's the people who are participating in those projects. The individuals, the workers, all the way from the project manager down to the individual carpenter, electrician, plumber, et cetera. Those are people with jobs that are being, they're being given employment by working in our city and putting up these buildings and doing these projects. And so we have to be very mindful to make sure that people who do work in our city and do good work are being paid appropriately. I'm going to briefly just explain to the crowd here who may not know exactly what wage theft is. Specifically, this ordinance deals with wage theft in construction, but wage theft does occur in many other industries in many other ways. So what is wage theft? Well, basically pay people under the table, employing people as independent contractors when they should be paid appropriately and employed by the project as a employed and taxed employee. As I said, classified as independent contractor. When you are paid under the table and you're classified as an independent contractor and you're not in the tax rolls, oftentimes people are not offered workman's compensation or other health benefits. They're not paid overtime. They're not paid the legally required wage rate. We talk a lot about prevailing wage. And they're forced to work unpaid work. This goes back to not being paid overtime. And many times they're not paid at all. So you show up, you do hard work, you give the skills that you've trained most of your life to do, and then you walk away and you're not paid by the contract, the project manager, and that's just not fair. In the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, wage theft hurts all these people, families that are hardworking, as I mentioned, to the tune of $700 million in lost wages. This affects 350,000 workers in the Commonwealth. It's also estimated statewide that the inability to recoup stolen wages has resulted in a $13.5 million loss in annual tax revenue, as well as $280 million lost in GDP in the state. A lot of people have mentioned during the course of this discussion with this proposed ordinance that this ordinance, if enacted, will hurt the taxpayers by rising the prices of bids. I disagree. I say without enacting this ordinance, we can potentially see loss of tax money, especially with tax-funded projects, if wage theft is allowed to occur, or we don't have the proper framework in place to identify it and sniff it out and take care of it when it happens, which I hope it doesn't. Wage theft is exploitation. It's people who are potentially marginalized doing some of these jobs, whether they be financially marginalized or marginalized based on gender or race. And it's about employers taking advantage of people and knowing that they may not have the ability to have access to recourse for the hard work that they did. And generally, these are people who are telling the truth. It's people who are doing hard work and are not being paid or are not being classified properly as employees. Here's some examples of some recent cases that the Attorney General tried and successfully recouped money, $160,000 recently in stolen wages. These are both recent. 10 workers in Amherst filed wage theft complaints and were able to recoup $58,000 in back wages. And as we know, local municipalities have recently enacted wage theft ordinances. Springfield, Worcester, eastern part of the state as well. I know that Chicopee is also considering something. So this is a real thing that happens, and it is something that is illegal in the state, but the problem is we need framework to make it work. So again, touching upon that, wage theft is already illegal, so why create an ordinance for it? Well, the problem is that without the proper paper trails in place, without the proper mechanisms for people to identify or be able to claim that they've been victims of wage theft, it makes it very, very difficult, especially with workers who might be, like I said, marginalized or being taken advantage of, to be able to prove that they were otherwise victims. So we as municipal representatives and people who can create ordinances and laws can make a framework so it makes it easier if such a terrible thing happens to a worker or workers, that we can help the Attorney General when a case has been filed, lead them down the path of what exactly has gone on and make it easier to recoup monies. So again, why pass an ordinance? Well, I've already touched upon that. We're creating a municipal framework. A lot of people say, well, why don't you just touch upon this when every single bid document is signed? Well, the point is that we're setting, as Councilor Conniff said before, we're setting the bar. She set a different bar, but hopefully us as a group will set a bar. We're setting the bar for everyone who wants to come in and do construction or do jobs in Easthampton. We're saying this is where you start. This is ground zero. You're not going to steal from your workers. You're not going to be someone who's been participating and had participated in wage theft prior. This is where you start. This goes into every single contract. It's codified as law. And a lot of other neighboring municipalities have already enacted these. And again, we're standing up for workers' rights. And it's important to note too, again, to go back on what I was talking about before, where people think this will cost the municipality money. I've done some research about this. I think people will speak to this too. I haven't found any evidence of this raising bid costs. But what does happen is if you're not keeping your eye out for it, you see tax dollars go away. If people are inappropriately paying workers, they're pocketing tax money, especially with tax-funded projects, and they're leaving town. Here are some of the local municipalities that have already enacted wage theft ordinances in the state. As you see, our neighbor Northampton, Springfield, Worcester, New Bedford, Boston. And I was reading some articles yesterday that there have been numerous complaints about wage theft in Boston, even with the proper framework in place, and the Attorney General's office just doesn't have enough people to detect it. So, and fight it. And so imagine if you don't even have the appropriate framework in place, how more difficult that is. So what makes a good wage theft ordinance? Well, setting up a series of regulations to start immediately to screen out bad contractors. So if you have participated in wage theft, you're automatically out. a process for investigation, and basically, as I said before, leaving a paper trail, asking contractors to sign sheets documenting workers' times, who's been working on the project, et cetera, all the way from the project manager down to the last carpenter. As we spoke about marginalized populations, it's also very important to make sure that not only does Easthampton make sure that our workers are paid fairly, but that we support a diverse workforce. So women, minorities, veterans, and also trying to pay some deference to people who come from Easthampton and are looking for work. It's important to make sure that we include provisions to at least ask employers to make an attempt to make sure that we have diverse and local hires. And then especially in the case of TIFs and HDIPs, where you're getting public dollars that are being taken out of local tax revenue and put specifically into projects, that we are making sure that that tax money goes to pay workers and the project only, and doesn't pad the pockets of unethical and dishonest project managers. So that's it in a nutshell. I would like to, may I turn the floor over now to anyone who wants to speak?
Could you come back to the table?
I was going to stand up here for moral support. Yes, I will. Thank you, everyone.
Could someone turn those lights back on? Thank you very much, Councilor Zaret. I would like to first open it up to the council for questions of Councilor Zaret, who's presented this. If anyone on the council has any questions for him before I open it up to the public. Councilor Lynch?
I have a letter from a constituent that wanted this read into the public record. Would this be the time you want me to do that now, or you want to wait?
I would suggest that we do it when we vote on it. It'll be more in everybody's head, or do you want it in the public record this evening? It's up to you.
He asked for it to be in the public record.
For
so,
this evening?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, I can, all right. Councilors, I come to you with significant concern regarding the proposed wage theft ordinance. I do work in the construction field, however, we do not bid on any commercial work whatsoever. So I assure you, my interest here is as a tax-paying citizen, not as a contractor. I understand the desire to put in effect measures that ensure the fair wages are paid and that the enforced laws are abided by. However, I feel it is imperative that you look closely at the potential negative impact of adding an additional layer of bureaucracy on an already heavily regulated and price-adjusted market. The state or municipal project in the Commonwealth has very strict guidelines that any bidding contractor must follow, including vast majorities of this proposal, which is already in place, prevailing wages and EEOP laws. With the substance of the change seen in the proposal are twofold. One, adding an Easthampton preference to employment of laborers, and two, potential of 5% penalty for perceived violations of any regulations laid out. Keep in mind the impact of looming 5% penalty is not 5% of the $60 million taxpayer portion of the school project, for example, but rather the 5% penalty on the entire $101 million project. Please reference Figure 1, page 24, in the attached MIT study, the relationships between the Massachusetts Building Code and construction cost escalation. The impact of the code change is always most drastic at the onset of the new code, largely because the unknown resulting impact of such code changed. Granted, this is a local ordinance, is not a building code, but it is a code that directly relates to the potential bottom line of a project by any potential builder, and we will likely see the same effect. It is not more direct of an effect, known unknowns versus unknown unknowns. Let's just say that the worst case scenario, and all bidders increase their bottom line by 7% to cover the potential fine and any additional weekly reporting duties and efforts to hire an Easthampton resident. That is the potential increased cost in the school project example of $7 million on top of the increase already incurred by the project itself. The proposed wage theft ordinance clearly comes from a good place. It is well intentioned and laudable on that basis alone, but the practical implications and potential costs far outweigh any potential benefits. All the best, Jay Andrezek.
Thank you, Councilor Lynch. Could you forward that to the city clerk since you want it in the minutes for review?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Because we all received that, but she didn't get it.
Got it.
I just want to say that although I don't agree with that particular letter writer, I do feel that it's important that we address those concerns. And the biggest one is no, It's not gonna add $7 million to the school building because it can't be used in that, and I don't think it would anyway. But just so that the residents who are watching know, this ordinance will not impact the school building and will not raise it $7 million. I have to say that because that's a scary thing when you hear something like that and rumors start. You know how that is. Counselor Zara, do you want to respond to the letter writer, or do you want to wait on that, or does anybody else have any other questions?
Sorry.
I don't have a question on the letter, I have a question in general, so if you
Okay.
want to respond on that.
My only comment, I think I agree with everything you just said, Counselor Riss, that, I mean, certainly as to the specifics of that letter, our school building project is not affected by this ordinance if voted in the affirmative. I disagree, again, based on research I've done and speaking to people in the field, that passing such an ordinance actually raises the costs. Again, as I said in my presentation, it's actually not passing ordinances like this that could potentially raise costs to the city in terms of lost taxes and lost tax revenue in the cases where we are using local tax structures to fund municipal projects. I read the study that he submitted as well, and that spoke more about the increased costs of projects based on materials and the potential rising costs in labor, but it didn't really speak much to local ordinances, et cetera, in terms of those being potential cost drivers for projects. I always appreciate when people send us email and send us comments, because I think that democracy is worthless if you don't have full participation. And I think some people will be able to speak more to this as well tonight, that I think some of those concerns can be easily dispelled by getting some professional input on what some of the experiences are in neighboring municipalities.
I just want to ask, because he mentioned it, the local ordinance, as you've told me, does not, it magnifies what's already in law at the state level. And it provides us with a local avenue for us to present to the, say, as you said, the Attorney General, if we discover wage theft in a future project is going on, we at the local level become her eyes and ears in a sense. Is there much in the ordinance that's different than the state ordinance? Is there a lot that's added, say?
I don't think there's much that's added other than some of the diversity requirements, and I think just creating local pathways on the municipal level to make it easier to detect and to determine if people are perpetuating wage theft. The other thing I wanted to say really quickly is the complaint about the fine. Well, I mean, that's like saying, well, you shouldn't have fines for people for speeding because I like speeding, and so you know, there shouldn't be penalties for criminal activity. The purpose of this is to give it some teeth. And if you're saying that we should we should take away fines out of our language to essentially make it easier for people to commit crimes and not be punished for them, that doesn't really make sense to me.
Consequence is important.
Correct.
I'm going to say this is an example of why we need city attorney review, because there are contractors that are concerned about this.
Mm-hmm.
And should we have a court case in the future because some contractor says you can't do this, or this particular language is wrong, etc., it'd be nice to have our city attorney on our side. So that's one of the reasons why I've asked for that. Councilor Khanna, if you want to comment or
Yeah,
question.
I have a question and then two comments. So the question is, this ordinance is around municipal construction contracts and tax increment finance and housing development exemption agreements?
Correct.
So my first question, don't answer it yet,
Okay.
is what's the difference between, like, what are each of those? And then I noted in reading this that substantially the same 12 points that are on the first one exist on the second one, although in a different order. Maybe we can standardize the order.
Mhm.
But then they add one at the end around complaints and compliance with qualifications, yada, 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 submit in writing no later than 270 days. Why is that on the tax increment one and not on the municipal construction contract one? And why is the date of effectiveness different for each of those? This one is January 1, 2020, this one is immediately.
There's a lot of questions. So tax increment financing and housing development exemption agreements are local, either local mechanisms or state tax exemptions that could be used to fund municipal projects. There are forms that we talked about when we talked about One Ferry Street, and remember we formed the District Improvement Financing. When you have established a DIF, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm still not an expert on this, but when you've established a DIF, you can also then opt into TIF, tax increment financing, where you use that local tax structure to then either via bonding to fund that, to help fund that project.
Okay.
So I don't want to get that. And then the housing development exemption agreements are another form of tax relief offered by the state for certain projects involving housing construction.
So they're essentially the same, this one just has some tax relief aligned to it, where the former does not.
Right, so the first section of,
You
no,
wanna help?
At some point I want to jump in, but
well,
you know, say you should
no,
say.
go ahead.
So we're basically saying that this applies, if I understand it correctly, to projects that the city is, municipal construction projects, but also say that a private company or a private developer comes in and wants tax incentives to do something, that construction as well. If the city is subsidizing it, they need to play by fair rules and they need to pay their workers all right. Is that?
That's exactly what One Ferry Street does.
Yes, and then so there are some other projects that might not be funded through some of these tax structured funding, and that's why it was separate. They're actually somewhat three separate ordinances, but just kind of combined into one, so that we didn't have to do it 3 times. Now, as to why, I know exactly what paragraph you're talking about. Let me find that.
It's
that
13.
one.
Yep.
I think it's because of the method of financing being used. The method of the financing being used in regards to TIFs and HDIFs, as opposed to where there's actually some participation either locally or with state funds in terms of the funding thereof, and as opposed to just the first section with just general contracts where there may not be tax structure financing involved. Does that make sense?
Not entirely, but since we have some time,
and I
I
think
will seek out some.
Well, I think there's some people here tonight who may be able
Maybe I'll
to
explain.
clarify that as
Okay.
well.
But I also would like to suggest that the ordinance committee review these
Yeah.
kinds of things, because if it's not amended significantly, like if they add a paragraph here and there, and it's the same paragraph that existed elsewhere, do we have to republicize? Yes. In other words, if the ordinance committee chooses to make this a little clearer,
Yeah,
you vote on it.
yep,
Absolutely.
You have time to do it, and you may get something back from the city attorney that requires amendment anyway.
okay.
And I'll say that Lisa Clausen, who's here tonight, could probably clarify some of these questions.
Okay. Tom, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Nope.
Are we all done? Oh, Counselor Krasinski?
Just to get into some of the specifics, would Counselor Zaret, maybe you can answer this one, or perhaps someone else can, who will be answering questions later, or making presentations. Will the projects apply to items like low-income housing tax credits that the state issues, affordable housing tax credits, historic preservation tax credits? Is that the intent, to broaden the scope so it's not just municipalities, but projects that the municipality may or may not be directly involved in, but state funding is involved within our community?
I think that the representative here from I had some of these similar questions, and there's certain methods of funding that, for instance, are quote-unquote off limits from this ordinance. It only applies to certain mechanisms of funding. So
And that's because of the state law?
I think that has to do more with the funding structure used, and the fact that the way the funds that are being used and specific guidelines that already apply to those projects. But
I think it would be helpful if there were a visual that kind of mapped out what applies and what doesn't apply for some of us.
yeah, I think that when you're, I think I have an expert here in the audience.
Just want to make sure, Councilor Krasinski, have any other
Yeah,
questions?
I did want to ask if there's anyone in the audience who will be addressing some of the questions from the letter that was brought up. I would be interested in knowing more about the actual 5%, the penalty that was discussed and what it does apply to, whether it's restricted to damages or to the whole project, the 5% penalty, and the weekly reporting duties that are recommended in the ordinance. Will this require further municipal effort to maintain, just how much
How
effort?
about
If
if-
you were to, if this were to be managed by the proponents of this, how would it best be managed to minimize the impact of additional costs to the city?
Councilor Krasinski, since these questions are very important, I'd
Well,
like to bring
someone
up
out
this
there's
person.
listening.
So, who is she? Can you,
Lisa Clausen.
Lisa, why don't you come up, and since you're one of the, she is one of the people that's brought it forward.
Correct.
We normally don't allow comment to have questions and answers, but since you are one of the people that's presented this,
Sure. And my
we will allow
colleagues.
Councilor Kuzinski to ask you questions, you can answer them one at a time. But I also know that you're caught a little bit off guard by this email. Did you forward it to her at all? The email from this resident?
I did make her aware of it.
But I haven't seen the email.
Well, you're gonna have time to look at it, because I'm gonna ask Councilor Zara to forward it to you, and then at the next time, because we're gonna reopen the public hearing, you could comment on that.
Sure.
If you're not really, because she's at a disadvantage, she hasn't read the email.
And we're not meaning to put you on the spot, we're just trying to educate ourselves and the public as to the matter at hand.
So why don't you go ahead and answer any questions you feel you can, and then I'll open it up to anybody on the council that
Sure.
might need more answers.
So I'm Lisa Clausen. I work with the Carpenters Union. My colleague Tim Craw, and between us, we'll start tackling the different questions that were brought forward. So.
Just for clarity, that's from the state level? Your work with the Carpenters Union or local?
We work out of our Springfield office. We cover
Okay.
Central and Western Mass,
Got
but
it.
it's a New England-wide organization.
Right,
so-
I'm just curious
Yep.
where you were based. Thank you.
Yep, yeah,
Lisa,
so I.
Could you just make sure you're speaking into the microphone?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, the first question, I'll get these out of order, I know, but so let me jump around to the different questions. The reason why there was a different date on some portion of it starting versus the other was because we were sensitive to the issue of whether one ferry had started yet or not. And there were concerns that that project was already in motion, but might, depending on when this got taken up and when that started, might have affected it, and a desire to not have it, shorten, affect that adversely. And so.
There's no requirement that they be different, other than
No,
that?
no,
Okay.
no. And then the reason why they're written slightly differently, so a TIF and an HDIP, the differences between the two is another question. So they're both deferred tax payments that a developer can seek in coming to a community. It's set up by state law, and the local municipality has to approve it and has to contribute towards it. And when the local municipality does, then the state also contributes deferred taxes, contributes funds to the project. And usually it's a 10-year scope of reduced taxes. It's a schedule that's put together that municipality. And so TIFs are for commercial development projects, and HDIPs are for housing development projects. And so they're essentially the same thing, but it's two different state agencies that oversee them. Where TIFs is the economic development, and HDIPs are seen by housing and community development. So it had to be two different agencies that then deal with it, and so that's where kind of it had to be separated out and written slightly differently. There also are different bid laws that cover contracts that are different from how these tax abatements, the process with the state on granting a TIF or an HDIP. And so that's why there's slight differences in what, what is written there and covered for the contracts piece that's separate from the TIF and the HDIP. The TIF and the HDIP has a process that if wage theft is found on that job that happens, that you could petition to the state to have some of that money come back. So that's my understanding of it, and Tim is much more familiar than I am with state bid laws 149 and that sort of thing. In terms of why these state-funded projects, I think you were asking, and not other state-funded projects, it's where the town is putting a contribution in, that the town then has an ability to put conditions on that contribution. So there are some cases where the state contributes to projects in Easthampton, but because Easthampton doesn't contribute to it, Easthampton has no say on what conditions you want to put on that project, on what happens. But where the state is giving money or being asked, where Easthampton is being asked for a contract or to contribute to a project, then Easthampton legally has the ability to say, yes, we'll give you this money if you agree to X, Y, or Z. And so that is why what is covered here is covered, and how it's been done in other municipalities as well. In terms of overall and having consequences and the 5% and having a value if wage theft is found to happen, the whole purpose of the ordinance is really to be a deterrent against it. I mean, a lot of those different points that are listed for contracts for the TIFs and HTIPs are about following existing state law and federal law. And so you don't, on one hand, you don't even need to put it in the ordinance again because it's already the law that they have to follow it. But because there is such a problem in our industry as well as in some other industries of contractors and businesses not following the law, by putting it here, we're saying extra oversight is happening in this community. We're putting you on notice again that you need to follow all of these laws. And by having some consequences of fines of the value of the contract, or that the city can ask for some of that money, tax money back, is a deterrent. Don't, if you're gonna play games, don't play games on the publicly funded project that you're getting here in Easthampton. Play games somewhere else where they're not paying attention, and it's to be a deterrent for wage theft not to happen. So that's the premise of it. What the value actually that you settle on, we're flexible, we're open to if what that could be. This was a suggestion that we had that would have some consequences there for it. And one other thing just to say on that is what this does is it really levels the playing field. There are lots of honest businesses that are out there bidding and putting together numbers for their bid based on paying wages to their employees as employees, paying their taxes, paying workers' comp, paying the insurance that they need to, and they're getting undercut by folks who are, sometimes it's all an even playing field, and sometimes they're getting undercut by contractors who are cheating. And so we're trying to level that playing field so that it's, honest businesses are able to put in a bid and know that others are playing by the same rules as well.
Two questions, and
Yep.
I know you may have others, Councilor Brzezinski. First is, this affects all contracts with any kind of employee, not necessarily just union employees, correct?
Correct, right.
So I want everybody to know that. I know the Carpenters Union is putting it forward, but that doesn't mean that a non-union contractor
It's not any
still
union
has
issue.
to follow that.
Right.
So you mentioned that the consequence of the fines, is that a local decision, how much that is?
Yes,
So that's something that can be debated locally.
correct.
That leads me to again ask, and I'm gonna ask you to help Councilor Zaret. I would like the council to have, maybe in highlight form, elements of this ordinance that are not in the current state law, or that are perhaps strengthened. So that, in other words, language that we in Easthampton are adding that might not be in Northampton, or at least not in the state level. I'd like the council to know that, at least I would like that. Does everybody agree with that?
That's a great point.
Because then at the next meeting, we would ask those specific, because the language that is repeated from the state, I don't have a problem with, we can't change that.
Yep.
And we certainly can't weaken that language, but we can strengthen it if we want to. So I would ask that you both present that.
Sure.
Okay.
And then one other point on that and how it reflects and is similar or different from the state is on the diversity component to it. And one of the issues addressed in the letter was concern about having to be required to hire Easthampton residents. The ordinance actually just says to advantage Easthampton residents. It doesn't say a set amount that have to be hired, but, you know, look favorably on them because you're getting Easthampton funds for it. So put that out there. But it's not a state law on diversity, but it was an executive order that's issued. It was issued under Deval Patrick and still stands under Governor Baker to address diversity issues in construction and opportunities for women and people of color in construction. Deval Patrick, there is a federal requirement on federal construction dollars that 6.9% of the work hours need to be at a floor for women, and 15.3% for our region as a floor for people of color. That number varies by region. But
And that comes from?
it was set under the Carter administration in 1978, and it's not been achieved. So Deval Patrick, when he was
Gee, I wonder why.
governor,
Sorry.
he set it as a executive order as a goal for all state-funded projects. So that's where it stands for state, and then different municipalities have chosen to, in some cases, put in, mirror that, in some cases go higher. Springfield went higher, Boston has gone higher, Worcester mirrors the state, and the numbers that are in this ordinance are mirroring the state and the federal numbers of having a floor of 6.9% work hours for women and 15.3 for.
So again, that's important to me,
Yep.
that wouldn't be highlighted because it mirrors state law.
Yep.
Okay.
And may I just interject there too, that the role there, again, is to encourage diversity in hires. These are by no means, all the employer has to do is demonstrate that they're making every attempt to meet these guidelines.
Requirements to get the contract.
Right, certainly that's what we would like. We would like to see more women and minorities and veterans hired, but if they don't meet them, they just have to submit reasonable documentation explaining how they made every effort to, through their hiring process, to try to meet these requirements.
Counselor Lynch.
Is there a penalty if they don't submit the paperwork showing those requirements? Is that gonna be part of it?
It's in there somewhere.
So you say yes, but you're not sure what it is.
I didn't.
The penalty applies if they don't meet any of these requirements.
Right, so the 5%, so if they don't do their paperwork and all that, so somebody in the city's gonna have to be following up, and I think that's what you were alluding to with who's gonna do all the bookkeeping on that side of it, but, all right, thanks.
So, I was just gonna add, because you reminded me that I didn't answer the question about kind of resources and oversight and compliance. We, in working with Councilor Zaret on this ordinance, understand that Easthampton is a smaller city and doesn't have unlimited resources to do as much compliance as you'd like on all different laws. And so the way it was written is that contractors and a developer who gets a tax break would just be having them sign affidavits that they have not had a wage theft violation and that they understand the aspects of the ordinance and will adhere to it. And so the procurement office would get those and file them essentially, and then would have a process where they would have to then submit paperwork, which is standard and most contractors are used to, because there's these state requirements, these state goals around diversity and different requirements in other places too on wage theft, and they're used to, with city contracted work, they have to submit payrolls anyways each week. So it's just those documents get filed away, and then what happens is when someone feels that there is wage theft that has happened, there's then a process for them to be able to FOIA the documents to look at, you know, did that contractor sign off that they were going to adhere to it, take a look at the payrolls, that there's a process that they can be requested. But it's not going to be somebody on staff who's going to have to go out and start checking out job sites and questioning workers or anything like that. In some bigger cities, in Springfield and Boston and in Worcester, they are doing that, and they have staff who are doing that, and it's still a minimal level because, you know, they prioritize which jobs to do it. They have limited staff. But here, the idea would be set a process for if you know, someone comes forward and says this has happened on the job, that there's a process then for investigation, and City Council could have a hearing and look at what the evidence is on it.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Councilor Kozinski, did you have another one?
Obviously, you see a benefit to having the municipality be involved, to have an ordinance, to have a place to start for paperwork in Freedom of Information Act, you said, to be able to go to. If there is a violation, I can go to somebody in the city, and there are records that I won't get from the employer, but I can get from the city.
Correct.
Isn't the state collecting similar information already? Isn't data available elsewhere on these projects? For example, state money. You said that there would be a weekly payroll submitted to this municipality. Doesn't the state have a weekly payroll submitted to them when
They don't.
have a bid sent out on millions and millions of dollars of contracts?
Only when the state funding is involved. So if there's
Right.
state funding in the project, then yes. So, for example, on a school project, you know, the state would be collecting payrolls as well as the local municipality. But most of a city contract, no, the state is not collecting that. The state law says the town has to collect those payrolls, but the state is not collecting them. Is that
No, I
correct?
can speak. So under Chapter 149 and Chapter 149A, and 30B payrolls are submitted.
Right.
Anything outside of those bidding laws, they are not currently required to be submitted unless by a municipality. And that would be the only difference. So and I'd like to remind you, it's not paperwork anymore. As somebody who reviews digital payrolls pretty regularly, it's push of the button, attaching a file, and it's sent. It's changed a lot in 20 years, thank God.
So I guess the question in my mind is, what kind of projects are we going to catch? The city, nothing is jumping up in my mind that we spend building construction funds on,
Oh, I could tell you.
that we don't have some sort of reimbursement. Not much. I mean, the projects tend to be small. It could be a $30,000 or $40,000 job somewhere. Where, you know, the $100 million schools and the Ferry Streets, not that Ferry Street is covered in this, but it would be covered otherwise under another type of project,
Yep.
are all big projects that the state is involved in.
So,
already.
an example
So
is.
what kind of projects are we trying to catch
So
with a
an-
net here?
An example is in the city of Springfield, they passed a TIF ordinance around wage theft, but hadn't yet addressed it on housing. And a developer came in, a Silverbrick development, and got a HDIP from the city, a housing tax break from the city, and the state kicked in money for it too. And then got found and shut down at different points for a contractor that didn't have workers' compensation. Everyone was classified as an independent contractor. They didn't even have workers' compensation plan in Massachusetts for anybody. Another contractor was found on the job that was hiring unlicensed plumbers, that was sealing up work before the building inspector had gotten in. The building inspector shut the project down. So this was a project that got public funding from the city of Springfield, and then went and, you know, was essentially stealing from workers and taxpayers. And as a result, the city then passed the HDIP ordinance, and the mayor, who had concerns on the TIF in the first time, ended up signing it and saying, I support this because, you know, this is crazy that this developer went and did that with our public funds. So it's largely on bigger projects. Certainly where a tax break would be, tax assistance would be given is on a bigger project. But on city contracts, construction contracts for, you know, down the road, if you're renovating a library or some other public building, these protections would be there for that as well.
Okay.
Just,
Councilor Zaret, I'd like to open it up to the rest of
Okay.
the, could be brief.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, certainly it doesn't apply right now because of the timing of this, but obviously certainly our school project, as you mentioned, but, you know, don't forget that we do have other buildings in the city that we have our eyes on about renovating after the school project is complete. And personally, I don't necessarily care if we never have a construction project in the city again, but if we're sending out the signal to everyone that when you do business in Easthampton, you do it fairly, whether it's for $100 or $100 million, that we have our eyes on you, and there's oversight, and that we're making sure that people are being treated fairly and paid fairly. And that's, for me, that's what this is about. And I think Lisa covered pretty well too that it's reasonable concerns too, that I do not believe that this creates, or either A, creates the need to create any more positions within the city, or B, creates any undue burden on people already in the city, i.e. the Office of Procurement, in regards to having to do more work. It's basically just receiving paperwork, placing it on the public record, and it's there for, if any time anyone wants it, to know what's going on.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the audience, unless there's anything really important from the council. Again, we'll have another opportunity, and I'm hoping, Lisa, you and your partner forgot your name, can come back on the 4th.
Yes,
Thank
definitely.
you.
And I'm on the public list. I'll cross off since I've spoken, but if I could just add on one final
Don't
point.
cross it off. We want that for the city clerk here to
Oh, okay.
be
No,
able
who
to
was
spell
here?
your name correctly.
Correct, okay.
Not that she ever doesn't. So.
One last point, which was another issue that was raised in the letter that you read, Counselor, is raising costs, that passing this ordinance would raise costs. It would only do so if bids are coming from cheating workers, because there are state laws around what you need to pay. With state contracts, it's prevailing wage. With private construction that's getting tax dollars, it's just minimum wage. But having workers' compensation, paying for overtime, things like that. And so this would not raise costs at all. It again just levels the playing field, and they're already bidding knowing that those are the costs they have to pay. But as Councilor Zaret pointed out, it is about bringing taxpayer money back through ensuring that payroll taxes are being paid and insurance is being paid, and we're not all carrying the burden of that not happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, if you'd like to speak to the wage theft ordinance, now is your time. Please come to the podium. Print your name. If there's a lot of people that want to speak, maybe you can all print your name before you speak. Secondly, please limit it to 3 minutes if you can. And lastly, it's not a question and answer segment, it's for comment only. Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
My name's Daniel Hamill. I live on 173 Main Street here in Easthampton. I just like to, talk about this wage theft with workers that I've experienced in my life. I mentioned this one before, is where I was working on a job. The roof was filed sub-bid. What they did, they got friendly with one of the roofers. What they did was paid him for 20 hours work, and he's working 40. They cheated he was still making what he made before, but the contractor was pocketing the money. Another one, I was at a job at UMass, is where the cabinets went to a company we weren't familiar with, and they had 6 carpenters there, and they were paying one carpenter's rate. The other ones were being paid labor's rate. And actually, one of them talked to me, and after the job was done, he went to the state and through the proper channels and got reimbursed the money for that. And then there was another job, is where a smaller company did a job, and they were getting a prevailing wage job, which was more money than they usually get, is that they were required to come in on Saturday mornings and work for free. I mean, this is the things that happen. I got my brother, sisters over here, but you know, can speak to, they can tell war stories like this all day, you know? But that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Someone else, please?
Hello, councilors. My name's Maureen Carney, City Councilor in Northampton, your neighbor to the
welcome.
north. And we did pass wage theft legislation a couple of years ago with the help of many of the folks who came here and many of our other friends and community organizations. It was pretty comprehensive, including most of the things that are presented before you in your ordinance, and I will say that in that time you should know that it hasn't affected contract prices or made developers any less interested in building in Northampton. And also, I speak to you as an electrician from IBEW Local 7. It's been my trade for 35 years. I'll let you know that the average age of electricians now is 57.
Ouch.
So
I didn't
these
mean
are
that, but
jobs,
drivers.
that's the average age of electricians, and we're hurting. We need people doing, and now is the time. I also belong to the policy group on tradeswomen's issues and the Northeast Center on Tradeswomen's Equity. This is the time to bring in all of these resources that come to bear from women and people who've been underrepresented in this industry for decades, if not centuries. So I strongly support the language that comes before you. And I know there are many people to speak tonight, so I'll just highlight the points here that Lisa and the folks from the Carpenters Union said that no contractor should be allowed to cheat workers, we know that, or taxpayers through not properly paying people and paying taxes or insurance. On publicly supported projects, extra care should be taken to ensure that this doesn't happen. The ordinance would level the playing field, as we heard from the previous speakers. And the currently responsible contractors who follow all the wage and hour laws are undercut by businesses that don't. And the ordinance puts extra consequences on cheating, creating disincentives for doing so. And the ordinance before you also works to reduce the diversity gap that exists in construction through requiring very minimal standards of diversity on publicly supported projects. So I encourage you to reach out to me if you want to talk about Northampton and our process. And also, thank you for considering this. And I hope that we can make this a Western Mass example for the rest of the state. So thank you for pulling it forward, Councilor Zarrett, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. You can come back anytime. We like hearing from Northampton.
My name is Blair, and I'm a resident of Easthampton. I'm a proud electrical apprentice union at Local 7 in Springfield at the IBEW.
Sorry, your last name, Blair?
Gimma, G-I-M-M-A. And just briefly, I want to say, of course, I support this ordinance, and to also stress the importance for these standards to hire women, hire people of color. You know, if it weren't for the advocacy of other women in the trades and for these standards, I don't think I would be working in the trade right now without that pressure and that advocacy. You know, Maureen supported me in my efforts in getting into the IBEW, and I also wanted to say that that when you are a woman or a person of color and you want to get into the trade, sometimes the jobs that you're looking to get, sometimes you have to lower your standards to even get into the trade to begin. And it can make you more susceptible to some of these wage violations. For instance, when I entered, I did get misclassified, and I did have to handle that. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Counselor, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, my name is Timothy Crow. I'm a business representative for Carpenters Local 336. I just wanted to speak to the 5% council order that you asked about. Whatever the deterrent is, it should also include a percentage to cover the cost that the city may incur in following up on that process.
Legal costs.
Legal costs or whatever other costs associated.
I'm sure you passed this on to councilors.
I'm sure it will be. I also will say prior to my 20 years in the union, I was a non-union contractor, and I can assure you this has been around for a very long time. I've worked cash, I've worked 1099, I've been illegally misclassified, I've worked for contractors in the non-union sector who legally misclassified folks. One of the biggest issues that at the time that we came across for a particular contractor I worked for was that child support was not being paid by a number of tradespeople because they were off the books. So there's no way for the state to find out where they were. Mm-hmm. The city got involved, found out that in fact that cash was being involved, cash was being paid. It was a federal project. The feds and the state also got involved. That was quite a while ago. But there are much more victims than just the worker on the job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Hello, my name is Julie Boucher, and I was born and raised here in Easthampton. My parents were born and raised in Easthampton. My mama and pape were raised here in Easthampton. You know, I can't say enough great things about the city, and one thing that my parents always taught me when I was younger is that, you know, you gotta play fair, and I think by supporting this ordinance, we're just playing fair. You know, we're setting the bar of just being fair. And some of these contractors out there, they don't play fair. When I wanted to join the trades, it was not easy. I called many non-union contractors, and they hear my voice as a female, and they say, sorry, you know, we're not looking. So, you know, thankfully I found the Carpenters Union. They welcomed me with open arms, and here I am, assistant superintendent for Shawman now. And, you know, I hope that you see that there are some not so great contractors out there, and we just want to make sure that they know that we want to play fair. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Someone else? She's
Hi, my name's Patrick Burke. I'm the president of the Hampshire Franklin Central Labor Assembly. We're part of the Western Mass Area Labor Federation, and so my assembly represents about 8,000 union members throughout Hampshire County, including Easthampton and Northampton, Amherst, Greenfield, all the different hill towns. And so wage theft is something that you know, we're working on different levels, both at the state level and at local municipalities, because this is something, like I think you know, the presentation the counselor gave at the beginning, you know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't an issue. If we didn't, you know, $700 million, this is more money being stolen in wages than in most other, basically almost all the other property crimes combined. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you know, if I ran over and took everyone's sign and ran out the door, I would get arrested, you'd get your signs back. Justice would be very swift and quick for me, and you would you would know that, and you know, and we know that, we all know that. But wage theft is something where it relies on people being exploited when they're in positions where they don't have the ability to you know, feel like they have the support they need, or to go to someone. You know, and the problem is that, again, at the state level, you know, our Attorney General can only do so much. So the more that we're able to kind of set the standard and saying that this is just an abhorrent practice that we completely disagree with, the better, you know, that we're, you know, making that clear, and like saying to the folks who, again, are the ones building our schools and fixing our roads and allowing us to have, you know, the infrastructure we need to live our lives, that, hey, you deserve to be paid, you deserve to be able to go to work safely. I mean, the other thing I have to deal with in the labor movement is just health and safety and all the issues that come with that. So, you know, oftentimes these things go hand in hand. If someone's not getting paid, then probably not following the safety rules either. They're probably not, you know, they're probably not building things to the right code. So that's why we want to address this issue this way, and you know why the rest of the labor movement, not just construction, is supportive of these measures. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody else?
Hello, good evening. My name is Lydia Wood, and I'm an organizer with the Western Mass Area Labor Federation. We're a coalition of local unions from across Western Mass, and we represent more than 20,000 workers. We're dedicated to building power for working people and to fight for a better world. I'm here to testify strongly in support of this ordinance. As you've heard many times today, every year an estimated $700 million in wages is stolen from about 350,000 Massachusetts workers. Wage theft comes in many forms, from the misclassification of workers as independent contractors, to missed paychecks, to employers who don't pay minimum wage, or employers that fail to provide workers' compensation to protect workers on the job. It is ubiquitous and intentional theft. It's not an accident, and it undercuts workers across all industries. It not only steals earned wages from the pockets of workers, but it also creates unfair competition for the employers that do play by the rules. And it threatens the safety of workers on the job and reduces the tax base for our cities and states. Its prevalence is reflective that for far too long, employers have been able to get away with enriching themselves by undercutting their workers. While our state attorney general is cracking down on employers that are guilty of wage theft, the fact is that the epidemic has overwhelmed the capacity of our existing labor laws and enforcement mechanisms. And it's really important that municipalities take measures for local enforcement. Not only will this ordinance introduce new safeguards, but it ensures workers in Easthampton are paid for their work. Its diversity and local hiring measures will also better ensure that it's the workers of Easthampton that are more likely to reap the benefits of local economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Laura Britton. I live on Ridgewood Terrace in Easthampton. I'm just gonna agree with the things that were said by the experts who are on board with this ordinance. I'd have to agree with all of it. I don't want to repeat it. But I also just want to say that this ordinance is really important right now because the time to act on this issue is before it actually becomes an issue in the city. And I commend the City Council for taking a preemptive step to prevent wage theft, and I urge all the City Council members to support this ordinance. On a separate note, if anyone is interested in organizing around a row resolution in Easthampton, please let me know. Come find me before you leave, and I'll take your email. Thank you. A row resolution. I can answer any questions on it. Thank you.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean it's about
you. Good evening. My name is Luis Feliz Leon. I'm an Easthampton resident living at 44 Townhouse Drive, and I am here to testify in support of the wage theft ordinance because it requires developers, contractors, and subcontractors to take the high road when they receive city and municipal subsidies or tax breaks. The high road to development in Easthampton requires that construction employers abide by a set of safeguards to protect workers from pervasive wage theft and encourages them to promote diversity under development projects. Unfortunately, too many construction employers cheat workers by misclassifying them as independent contractors and avoid paying employer taxes or provide insurance such as workers' compensation. As a high school student working in the restaurant industry, I experienced firsthand how unscrupulous employers can be and how they cheat workers. At the time, I worked over 40 hours as a cook but for half those hours I was paid off the books, and to avoid paying me overtime, I was misclassified as a part-time employee, although I worked full-time. Under the wage theft ordinance, contractors will have no option but to take the high road and play fair. As Easthampton develops into a destination for entertainment and a solid quality of life where people want to work, live, and raise families, we must ensure that the city's growth also promotes workers' rights and diversity on construction projects. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. So, councilors, I know you may have more questions, but we are going to review this again on September 4th. I want Councilor Gomez.
Just one question.
Sure.
About Thank you, Mr. President. I just have a question. It's about the percentage of the people of what I'm going to call minorities instead of people of color. But I think people of color is, I don't like that term. Even I prefer maybe the next meeting to make an amendment to change that. But my question is going to be, with this ordinance required 15.3% of minorities and 6.9% of women. If part of the 15.3% who apply for that is 6% are women, so that count as the other 6%. So now they don't have to add the other percent.
Their count is both.
Counts are both.
Is there a woman?
Okay, I just want to be clear with that.
Okay. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lisa? Thanks.
At least that's how the state does it.
All right, just to review, Councilor Lynch, you will send the clerk the email so that she has it, put in the record that you read. Councilor Zarrett, you and the Carpenters Union people will try to give to the full council highlighted sections that are not part of state law but are being added or being strengthened. So I would entertain a motion now to continue the public hearing, and I would like to add the language pending city attorney review so that it's clear the reason we are doing this is because city attorney review is necessary. And I'll have a comment later on all city attorney reviews, but I do feel that it is an example of why we need it is because there are those out there in this country, and certainly locally, who do not play fair when it comes to treating labor, any kind, union or non-union. And I want to make sure that our ordinance in our city can stand up to the court of law as it is. And I believe that's why I have stressed city attorney review. Councilor Zarrett.
Councilor Rist, in regards to your request to try to make sure that I present that highlighted language and hopefully in collaboration with the Carpenters Union, I'm going to paraphrase Yoda. There is no try, only do. I will do that for you. I think it's a very reasonable request.
Well, they say that in theater all the time. I got yelled at when I said I'll try.
Look, we've gone an hour and a half, and I haven't made any sort of puns or jokes, so I figure I'm due.
It's the best hour and a half I've
Thank you, Councilor Connell.
I'd like to make a motion to continue the hearing to the September 4th meeting, pending solicitor review and further review by the ordinance subcommittee.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess, so those of you that came for the wage theft ordinance, if I want to leave.
If I may, prior to the recess.
Okay.
I wanted to thank Councilor Khanna for her patience. I wanted to thank everyone who came tonight, specifically members of the Carpenters and other local unions, the workers that we're here to advocate for and legislate for, and Lisa and your colleagues for assisting with this, and look forward to collaborating you over the next month.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Back in at 25 up. Thank you. See it on TV.
Excuse me. Do you have a sign up for the people who spoke?
If it is, if it's up there, it is.
Where's water?
rain will be gone by the time we leave. Looks like it's the darkness is gone. The thunder and lightning is gone.
We're in a kind of like little hole.
That's okay. I have an umbrella. And it's warm, I don't mind. So we gotta remember I have to feed a cat when I leave here. Not mine. It's on my street, so it's okay.
That was the end of his I mean,
That's disgusting. Good. I was gonna say, no, that's disgusting. Look at that.
I mean, right now too, I'm also like in the
And that's what we as a senior,
So we need to get going. Take your conversations outside the room, please. Thank you.
We're ready.
I'm ready.
We can start. The clerk is here. 2 consultants are here. We need how many more? 3?
I stole the last water.
I just fill it up from there.
Where'd you get? Did you get those in there?
Just one. I think that was the last one.
You want it? You want it? No, here, I'll give it to you. I haven't drank from it.
Well, you need one though.
Yeah, well, he's gonna do the same thing that I did.
Refill this.
Go into the fountain and refill it.
This one doesn't work?
No, that doesn't work.
Looks like it's dead too.
Yeah.
Counselors, let's go, please.
Come on, guys.
Sure.
Yeah, I did.
President Pro Tem. And I'm on some committee. Said so. Who are we missing?
Peg.
Bill and Peg.
Yes.
And look who, they're both here.
Okay, let's reconvene, and Councilor Zaret, you're back up with the cannabis ordinance, please.
All right. I'll just read a really brief statement about this, just summarizing it. And so cannabis equity is what we're talking about here. The information's in your packet. The mission of the Commonwealth and the CCC has been very clear from day one in terms of making room for marginalized people and specifically what they've defined as economic empowerment applicants, and to make sure that we're including people from areas of disproportionate economic impact, and also to some degree people who have disproportionately been affected by cannabis when it was illegal. I'm very proud of the work that we're doing here, with much input from my fellow councilors on the ordinance subcommittee, as well as activists and interested people outside within the community. It's going to help us to become potentially one of the first, or maybe the first in the state, to create room for this industry to help guide the way or open doors for a variety of marginalized populations. Our city, in creating this ordinance, has certainly created room for economic empowerment applicants, as well as people who have been through the equity applicant program of the state. But we've also chosen to expand what we consider equity to include groups from the State Supplier Diversity Office, including minorities, women, and I agree with what Councilor Gomez said before. Using the term minorities here is only just adopting state terms, but I do agree with you that we have to be careful about some of the terminology we use. Veterans, LGBTQ business enterprises. We felt it was important also to create provisions to allow Easthampton residents to have a pathway to receive a special permit for cannabis retail. As a lot of you know, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the country, the industry has become dominated by giant corporations, and by doing so, they further widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. This gives a variety of groups, this ordinance allows a variety of groups to have ownership and stake in an industry that otherwise left unattended will be overtaken by corporate giants. I want to see individuals from Easthampton, marginalized people from Easthampton, minority groups from Easthampton to be able to have a stake and have some ownership in an industry that really should be more of a mom and pop enterprise than a faceless corporation. I just want to also say, as a footnote for some of the emails I've received over the course of time of working on this with my colleagues, I think that as a community welcoming the cannabis industry, we need to continue to work to educate the entire community, both youth, adults and youth. We need to look for options for educational programming and reduction of youth use and access. I do not believe that increasing the number of licenses takes away from our opportunities to educate and provide programming, and nor do I believe that it causes any harm to our community. What it does continue to say is that Easthampton is open for business, but more importantly, that Easthampton supports diverse business owners. So without further ado, was that short enough?
Yes, Councilor.
I'll be abstaining, so
Okay. I want to let everybody know that this will also be continued pending city attorney review. And I also wanted to know, Planner Bagg, you wanted to make a comment on this or not? No? Oh, I thought you did. Oh, sorry.
I did want to thank Planner Bagg though, because he was instrumental in helping us put this.
Well, this is a
together.
zoning amendment, correct? And the planning board voted 5-0 in favor of this?
Correct.
Am I correct?
And the ordinance subcommittee voted 3-0 in support of this.
Do we have any counselors that want to, where did he go? He just left? Oh. Okay. You don't have to leave the table, but that's okay. The counselors have questions. Again, we're going to be reviewing this again in September, but does anybody have any questions?
Do you want to summarize also exactly what we're looking to do? I don't know if that helps.
I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary. We're going to be doing it again, and I know the ordinance committee may be looking at it again too. Okay. So we have a public hearing, and you're welcome to speak, but again, you'll be allowed to speak again in September. So if there's anyone in the public that wants to come forward on this, pro or con, it's okay. Please state your name for the record and where you live.
Good evening. My name is Karima Risk. I live at 38 Everett Street, Easthampton. And I'm going to take a moment to write my name, and then I'll kick it.
She already knows your name.
Thank you. So I prepared some written comments I'm going to read, but I just wanted to generally say to the audience, and for those who don't know me, I have been in the cannabis space in Massachusetts since 2016. I've worked for approximately 3 either licensed or going through licensing retailers, so that's what's on the table today. I also am a passionate advocate for equity in the cannabis industry and have crisscrossed the state and engaged in many discussions around this issue. So it's near and dear to my heart. Finally, this ordinance in particular is very personal to me, and it's part of my advocacy because I, before you, since 2017, was in a position where I wanted to apply for a retail store. And as a person of color, as a woman, as a local resident, in a small business, I faced many hurdles that we are talking today. So I just want to personalize it for you and give you a face of someone in your community that could benefit from this ordinance. And hopefully with the right business environment, still could in the future if that opportunity is protected. So respectfully, City Council, I'm here to urge you to pass the Cannabis Equity Amendment before you today. The state equity in the Massachusetts cannabis industry is feeble and on life support. The economic empowerment and social equity programs have struggled to get off the ground, and one such applicant, Carolyn's Cannabis in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, has opened a licensed business. Only 4 economic empowerment applicants have been granted provisional licensing. Massachusetts has truly witnessed a green rush, with wealthy out-of-state operators flocking to open cannabis businesses. The current business environment, with caps on licenses and few stores open, favors those who can afford to pay the exorbitant startup costs, hire lobbyists and consultants, and endure the lengthy licensing and permitting periods. Likewise, the early operators gain important advantages, such as increased revenue, cash flow, and greater market share. INSA Easthampton, for example, earned a whopping $5.4 million in revenue in the last tax quarter, March, April, and May 2019. Meanwhile, equity applicants and local residents have been left behind in the dust without an opportunity to enter the market. It is extremely urgent and important to protect the opportunity for equity applicants to apply for cannabis businesses, including adult use retail stores. Massachusetts state law puts forth a mandate to ensure the meaningful, and I quote, the meaningful participation of the cannabis industry in communities disproportionately affected by the enforcement of previous cannabis laws, small businesses, companies led by people of color, women, veterans, and farmers, quote unquote. The CCC has empowered local municipalities to customize their adult use cannabis ordinances to fit the fabric of our communities. Easthampton is a community that leads by example and supports diversity and inclusion, from transgender rights to immigration, to civic engagement and public education. The cannabis industry is no exception. Equity needs protection or it will be stamped out by monopolies and multi-state operators. Adopting the equity amendment will slow down further development of the cannabis retailers. One only has to look at how long it has taken well-funded cannabis ventures to get off the ground, including 5 potential Easthampton retailers who have already held community outreach meetings as part of their local licensing process. Almost 1 year after the CCC began accepting retailer applications, only 3 of the existing 5 cannabis retailers who signed host community agreements with Easthampton have been granted provisional adult use licensing and special permitting. It will take even longer for small local equity entrepreneurs to navigate the complicated hurdles of securing a property, capitalization, licensing and permitting, and business development. I would further argue that the 2-year review period under section 10.10.45 in the proposed ordinance amendment is insufficient for small cannabis businesses to make such much progress before the first review occurs. They propose a 2-year waiting period. And I can speak to this personally. A small business would have to start the licensing application right away in order to be counted for the first review in 2 years. And I believe a 3 to 5 year period may be more appropriate in that example. The Equity Amendment seeks to build a foundation for a local, diverse cannabis industry to thrive. Some may ask, do potential local equity applicants who will apply for these equity permits exist? The answer is, it is too early to tell, but it is critical we protect the opportunity for equity applicants to have a chance at participation in the cannabis industry. No one could have predicted that Easthampton would have 5 adult use retailers applying for special permitting 1.5 years ago when the adult use cannabis ordinance was passed. At that time, we wanted to ensure that Easthampton put forth our best effort to create a robust, responsible, and progressive local cannabis ordinance. And the promise was that we would come back to amend what we didn't get right and take into consideration new market developments. It is critical that now we set the foundation to create a diverse, equitable local cannabis industry in Easthampton today. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you for your very well thought out comment. Thank you. Anybody else on cannabis equity?
Hi, I'm Lauren Simmons. I live on Fairfield Avenue, and Karima is a tough act to follow. So all I'm going to say is ditto. And a little more briefly than that, I've been writing about cannabis in Massachusetts, just starting off doing that. And I've been recently working on a piece where I was privileged to interview 4 different small business owners in the state and hear what they have to go through this Byzantine process. It's difficult. It should be it should be regulated. It should be. It's a necessary thing to have these requirements. But these large corporations have the finances to withstand the drawn-out process. And unless we ensure that we have equity and we make room for the small businesses and the micro businesses and the disenfranchised, who are we as a community? And I really urge you, and I thank you, especially you, Owen, for bringing this forward, and for all of you for really giving this the attention it deserves. I'm proud to live in this community. I'm proud to live in a community that stands up and to be inclusive for all its community and to see everyone in this community thrive. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
I guess then it's me. We're getting to know each other, by the way, over time, so it's all good. Stephen Linsky from River Valley Way. Because you're going to take this up again, so there's no need to launch anything. So I'm going to repeat your ditto. So the basic ditto. You received some written testimony, I think, recently, and I'm looking at one from the executive director of the Easthampton Healthy Youth Coalition that I'm a volunteer for, dated yesterday, that really says it all. There was an update, another email that went to you, Owen, I think, from Ruth earlier today, relative to some data that's been received. One of the things that we've been saying from the beginning of this process is that it isn't the substance, and there's no one, first of all, it's not really the coalition's business about equity, but having said that, there isn't an issue about the issue of equity. It's just about the numbers of permits. It's as simple as that. We went through a process a little over a year and a half ago to derive a starting point for that. And the hope had been at that point in time, having a starting point, we would work together as to what changes over time, because I think there's a learning curve to everything, and we all had to see what would roll out. This comes up at a time when, frankly, there just hasn't been the ability to track data to look at what has been happening. And to be honest, we've really only had one major player in a rollout, so there isn't a lot. But with the number of pending licenses, et cetera, that will change dramatically. And then adding a couple more is a concern if we're not kind of stepping step by step together as the program is rolled out. There'll be another discussion when we get to the point about cafes, but the point there again will be the same kind of mantra, and principle I've been talking about, which is we should be doing this as a community all together, bringing everyone in. There was reference in your comments, Councilor Zaret, about education and the monies to date. There hasn't been a dime yet from the revenue that's come in that has gone to Easthampton youth relative to education. So obviously we hope that changes. The coalition is between funding right now and has a application in for refunding, but we won't know about that till later in the fall. Long and short of it is we've been looking for a time to come before the entire council, and in that email I referenced, Councilor Zaret, Ruth had proposed the 18th, which is the second meeting next month. I know you're taking this up. I guess you're planning on the first meeting. We're taking the opportunity to review some of that data and trying to pull that together kind of as soon as possible. I will report back to Ruth to see how fast that can kind of be done, but I would be asking that it would be nice for the council to be able to take the next action with at least some indication of what some of the data may be showing, if we're able to analyze that in time, so it'd either be the 4th or the 18th. But let's see where we are on the 4th yet, because this is all news as of today, so I just don't know how long that would take. But the larger point to what has been submitted in testimony to date is that this is just about being able to work together to take a look at the effect on the city's youth, which I think is in everyone's interest, as it has always been. So I won't need to say more at this point in time. The only other thing I was going to add is that, and I had a chance to talk a little bit with the planner, is about the issue of transferability of permits, because yes, this is one way to certainly to create equity opportunities and licenses. The other way, of course, is that may be transfers. If I understand it, a non-equity license, a permit holder, could ultimately transfer to a equity, potential equity permit holder. The good news about this, and that's good news, for that could create other opportunities, and if I understand how this ordinance would work, if you are an equity applicant and become an equity permit holder, that particular permit could only go to another equity owner, I think. So in two ways, we should be able to add to the equity side of the equation going forward. So if that's what's meant to be accomplished here, there are ways of going about it as well, in addition to what this ordinance provides. So thank you. We'll pick it up, I guess, next month. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you.
Thank you. Anybody else, please? Okay, just a comment. One of the comments that the gentleman made, one of you guys, was about funding for education, and I've been thinking a lot about that. We are getting all this cannabis tax revenue. Why can't we use some of that money? And I think the council maybe should make a statement with regard to that, educating our youth with regard to cannabis and its effects, its consequence of its use, and what it means. I think it's an education that I would like, personally. I don't know. I haven't had that opportunity. And I think this council should take that into consideration, because we have new tax revenue that hasn't been applied yet to anything, and I would like to see it reduce taxes elsewhere. But on the other hand, educating our youth with regard to this is a very good thing we may want to look at. So I'd like did you want to say something before we?
I wanted to just comment on what you just said.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and that was why I included in my statement that there's no reason why these two things can't proceed together in parallel. I think it concerns me that there is an ongoing hypothesis that where we're waiting for empirical data to demonstrate somehow that the cannabis industry in our city is harmful, and if we wait long enough and collect the right data, we can show that. I do agree with you that we need to be more forthright and more proactive about education programs, and whether that comes directly from cannabis revenue or going back and asking, or a combination of going back and asking some of the retailers to voluntarily say, can you provide educational programs? We have resources there. But I agree with you, and I agree with Mr. Linsky that that's currently a gap in what we currently have in the local industry.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to continue the public hearing on adult cannabis establishments pending review from the city attorney to September 4th?
So moved.
Second?
Good. Any further discussion?
No.
If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Councilor Kwasinski, you want to rejoin us? Still don't know why you have to leave, but okay. Bike ordinance. I understand that this bike ordinance is going to have further amendment on this.
Yes, I can make
And
it.
I would like to suggest that we continue this public hearing to the second meeting, because I don't think it's as urgent as the first two to get done. Also, we'll slow, we probably have a long meeting then anyway. So if you want to present it, allow people to speak to it. Otherwise, that's my suggestion.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think that we had put this together, and then we got some very thoughtful feedback from, specifically from members of the Manhattan Rail Trail Committee, as well as the community at large. who are part of the cycling community and also just general users of the Manhattan Rail Trail. The impetus for this was multifold. There's certainly been a discussion recently about kind of what the intent and scope of the use of the rail trail is. And I thought that it was important to kind of create a mission statement and a scope statement around that. We had some somewhat vague definitions of use of motorized vehicles on the bike path, and again, I think it was important to try to create language around that. With the arrival of Valley Bike Share, it was important to create a more specific definition of electric bicycles for use in the city. As some of you may or may not know, in the state of Massachusetts, Chapter 90 does have a definition for a motorized bicycle, but we do not have really a real state definition for electric bicycles. And so we then generally defer, and what a lot of the neighboring communities have is to defer to US Code 2085, which defines what electric bicycle is, and also is very specific about that you can create language that's more restrictive, but can't create language that otherwise supersedes in a more permissive manner that. So I thought it was very important in order to protect both public use of electric bicycles on the bike path, as well as our Valley Bike Share, which has become a very important integrated part of the city and will continue to be, to define that. It was also through the discussion about the scope and use of the rail trail, discussions have come up recently about what is appropriate in terms of sizes of vehicles, and there was within the initial language submitted, as well as some independent language submitted, which we merged together. What I thought was reasonable language that basically creates, in certain ways, everything we're talking about here tonight is about equity. So we talked about equitable treatment of workers, we talked about equitable access to cannabis, and we're talking now about equitable access to a public space, in this case the bike path. And so on the bike path, in terms of making sure that everyone could have free use of it and free access at all times, we talked about a width restriction so that there aren't overly large vehicles on the path that may or may not restrict people's use or freedom to use there. I'm trying to think what else we kind of included in here. We talked a little bit about the use of kind of a new frontier, the use of the bike path for commerce. And I think we're going to dive into that a little bit more. And then generally also making sure that we're including provisions for people with disabilities who access the bike path via motorized scooters or wheelchairs or other personalized mobility devices, that we're actually recognizing that specifically, and that we're not violating any ADA guidelines. And then making sure that that motorized vehicles that may otherwise be so one thing that's coming down the pipeline is electric scooters. And so that's been a large discussion in a lot of other municipalities. A lot of municipalities have outlawed or restricted them altogether. And again, in the spirit of using motorized vehicles on the bike path or restricting motorized vehicles on the bike path, I thought it was important to bring that discussion in. Now, I created some very roundabout language, section 3-17.3 restrictions C, and I think there's better ways to describe that. And actually, Chapter 90 specifically has a definition of what is called a quote-unquote motorized scooter. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the thought behind this, and that there is some language that needs to be tied up. Also, specifically, I got some good feedback from the Manhattan Rail Trail Committee about the categorization, classifications of electric bicycles, and they recommended that at this time that we remove that and just very specifically just allow electric bicycles. We had talked about making sure that if bikes are being used in the bike path with a motor for assist, that they be used pedaling and not be used basically as an electric moped. But we have to tighten up some of the language, and I've gotten some thoughtful feedback both from, again, members of the Public Rail Trail Committee members, our esteemed clerk, who also happens to be very involved with the bike path. So we definitely need to tighten up some of the language. That's the intention in our upcoming meeting, as well to also receive attorney opinion for some of this.
It seems to me that you have a great deal to do on this. If you agree, I would suggest that you discontinue the public hearing and re-present, because I would suggest that you not send it to the city attorney until you finalize your language. And I don't know how long that'll take, because you have other things on your plate. So that's just my suggestion, that instead of setting the September 18th as a deadline, discontinue the public hearing, and maybe on September 4th, you can reset it if you're ready.
To the 18th.
Does that make sense to both you and Councilor Coniff?
think that's
I just feel you've got so much to do on it. Setting a public hearing or having people think it's gonna happen on the 18th would be premature.
I think that it's mostly tightening up what's there, but I don't disagree with you, and I'm happy if
And
you're.
you've gotta do all the amendments and then set it to the city attorney.
Yeah, it's mostly tightening up and removing some of the things that are here, but I don't have a problem with that, because we could theoretically then set the meeting for that second meeting in September.
I have to open it up to the councilors for further questions, but again, it sounds like there's a lot of more amendments coming down the pike. And I would suggest, councilors, that if you have some concerns, that you go. All right, that's it. You're getting shut down. My apologies. That you go to the meeting when that's posted as to when they're discussing this. But if you have questions this evening or comments, of course. If not, I will open it up to the public, but there will be a new public hearing with an amended ordinance coming forward. Does anyone want to speak to this evening, though? Sure.
All right, I'm Nick Vatrin from Chicopee, Massachusetts, and I am the owner of Pedal & Party. Pedal & Party is a non-alcohol group touring bicycle that fits 14 people and brings them around Easthampton, stopping at all the local businesses. I came up with this idea in March of 2018 to bring the bike to Western Mass. I put a few feelers out there to a few different places, and as I did more research, I came to realize Easthampton was the best fit, and I still stand by that belief. There was a trail in which we could avoid traffic. Everyone can fit, we know because we measured, and there were multiple fun stops along the way while enjoying nature. Before ordering my bike, I reached out to the city and was directed to the group governing the trail, which was the Manhan Rail Trail Committee. I met with them on July 23rd, 2018, told them my intentions, and they said there's nothing stopping me and wished me good luck, as they found it as a great idea. On July 24th, 2018, I ordered my new business investment from overseas to be built and shipped to the United States to start my first ever business. When the bike arrived in late September, I reached out to the licensing committee to sit down and discuss how we could go about getting alcohol on the bike. We met in October 2018, and they said that they needed until January 2019 to research. In January 2019, they referred me to the City Council, in which I was then put in the City Council subcommittee for discussion. I told the subcommittee my plans and how it would not only be great business for myself, but how great it would be for local businesses because of the tourism. Meeting after meeting, we discussed Easthampton rules and regulations, but never once found anything stopping me from running my business. One of the councilors even stated that my bike is not excluded from the trails exclusions. After conversing over this matter for months, I then asked the councilors if there was anything stopping me. Was anything from stopping me in starting in 2 weeks? They said no, but they would like me to update things as how they go. After the meeting, the media storm came in, and so did the bookings. After 14 practice runs from Route 5 to downtown and back, where no one got hurt, bike trail regulars stopped and told us how cool it was, and businesses being excited, we launched our first ever paid tour on June 7, 2019. After an amazingly successful trip, where a lot of money was spent from tourists and local businesses, we received an email at 10 p.m. telling us that we are no longer allowed to use the trail or roads of Easthampton. At this time, we had over 300 people booked to come spend money while enjoying how great Easthampton is. This was the first and last weekend that my business was allowed to operate. We were kicked off the trail because the legal counsel of the Mass DOT advised that we do not fit in the definition of what is allowed on the bike trail. That is what we were discussing for months with the city, or with the city councilors and the ordinance committee. The Mass DOT does not govern the rail trail, Easthampton does. The only reason the Mass DOT was reached out to was to find exactly what our pedal bike was declared. They did not declare us a slow-moving vehicle because we are not a vehicle. We are a big pedal bike with an electric motor used only when the driver needs to get safely to and from locations, but not with multiple people on it. I think a lot of people have missed the whole point of this business that we have brought to town. This business is to create a fun, outdoor exercise culture that shows all of the amazing treasures that Easthampton has to offer. It brings in tourism, it boosts local commerce, it's safe, it's fun, and it brings random strangers together from all different walks of life to show them good, clean fun still exists. This is honestly a win-win. This is what the Manhan Rail Trail Committee saw when they first wished me luck. They saw an amazing adventure that would be good for Easthampton, and to this day, the definition is still the definition of our business. The excitement for our business has easily overpowered the negativity, but unfortunately the negativity is trying to win today. So this part, because I thought we were voting on it today. Today you are going to vote on an amendment that was specifically written to end my business. Today most of you will vote on something that you will have never seen in action. Today you will vote on an amendment that does not allow me on the trail because I will be too wide. We have used wheelchairs in our measurements before making the investment. We saw many wheelchairs, strollers, children, and people walking multiple dogs on the trail and never once made them go off the trail or stop. We always made safety a priority while focusing on the enjoyment of the trail for everyone involved. Today you vote for an unfairly treated young entrepreneur with a business that creates unsurmountable tourism dollars to no longer exist. We were given the green light by the Manhan Rail Trail Committee and was told by the Ordinance Committee that there's no legislation stopping us, and today you are going to be voting on an amendment that contradicts those words. Before you vote on this new amendment, I would like you to truly think if not having to slow down and go around a bicycle for 5 seconds is worth getting rid of a tourism dollars producing machine that will make Easthampton be known nationwide. Thank you for your time.
Anybody else? Thank you. So, without further discussion, I would like the motion to be to discontinue the public hearing on Manhattan Rail Trail, the amendment to City Ordinances 317, until the Ordinance Committee is ready to represent. So if that could be the motion?
I'll second that.
Well, I can't make a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll make the motion to discontinue the.
Second.
Sorry.
Counselor Lynch, whatever I just said. Counselor Lynch is seconding you.
Just in terms of discussion, though, I do think that we'll be able to tighten up this. Most of the language is ready to go. It's just correcting some, some definitions.
So it might
and such.
be ready for the 18th, but.
Correct. Yeah, we're meeting on Tuesday.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion to discontinue? All in
Just had a
favor?
question.
Excuse me. Sorry.
Are we discontinuing without prejudice
Yes.
or
Let's add that to the
discontinue?
amendment. Amend the motion.
I'll make a
Discontinue.
motion to amend and include the term without prejudice.
All in favor of the amendment?
Aye.
Aye. All in favor of the original motion?
Aye.
With the
Aye.
amendment. Thank you. I just want to ask that the Counselor Zared, if you're ready, the two that are going to be dealt with, the wage theft ordinance, actually Counselor Coniff and Counselor Zared, and the cannabis ordinance be sent immediately to the city attorney. He's back from vacation on Monday, so that way we can get him going on it. I will be telling him to hold off on the charter, which I'll mention later on.
So send it to him without
Do you
the
feel,
cleaning up of
not the
things?
bike rail, Carol, I'm talking about the other two, the cannabis and the wage theft. Do you think they're ready to go to him, or do you need a lot of things to change?
I don't. I'll let you speak first, though.
I have a couple of things, but
Do you think that will directly impact it if we add a?
probably.
So I don't want to hold it up.
Right, and I would agree with Councilor Coniff that I think there's maybe a few language issues, but that I don't think overall affect the actual overall impact or scope of the ordinance. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah.
Well, absent Councilor Derby, who's the chair, can ask you to do that, like tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. I could just send it. Who do I just send it directly to?
Mark Tanner.
Tanner. Okay.
You have his email.
Mhm.
Now, lastly, on the public hearing agenda is municipal light plant. Councilor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. So, yeah, we met in rules about this. You'll probably remember it from the spring. Just to recap it, the process that the state laid, so first of all, the reason why we're doing this. The Telecom Advisory Committee had suggested that this was a good non-binding step to lay the foundation for a potential public internet utility that Easthampton might form in the future. We can establish a municipal light plant without ever, or we can give the city the authority to establish a municipal light plant and then decide that we don't actually want to and never do it, but we do need the city council to approve of this and then the voters to also approve this in order to ever be able to do that. We are in a position where Westfield is rolling their public internet out. Greenfield is rolling theirs out. South Hadley is starting that process. Chicopee is starting that process. The access to affordable, high-quality internet is going to be important for businesses, for potential future residents. When you see most of our peer communities looking into these sorts of things, it's certainly whether or not the administration next year or in 2 years or whatever decides to do this. It's something that having the authority to do it at the point that it seems like a good fit for Easthampton. To me, that seems important and valuable. I don't know if anyone in the audience has anything to say. I imagine Stan might.
It is a public hearing.
Yeah. So they'll have just. But if you guys have any questions, I think we've been over this a couple times. So.
But the council, this is just a repeat as required by law. Councilors have any questions? Does anyone in the public want to speak to the municipal light plant and this great idea of having our own internet service? Okay, then I guess this is the motion as written here.
Yes. Wait. On the agenda, or?
Yeah, that's what Barbara said. You could just read that.
Okay.
Motion you did before.
Yeah. I make a motion to authorize the city of Easthampton to take all necessary and appropriate action to establish and maintain, in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 164 of the general laws and in accordance with the rules, regulations, and orders of the Department of Public Utilities and the Department of Telecommunications and Cable, a municipal lighting plant for the purposes allowable under the laws of the Commonwealth, including without limitation the operation of a telecommunications system or any other related services, to take any other action relative thereto.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor to establish a municipal light plant. Do we have any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Thank you. Take a motion to close the public hearing.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on. Finance is me. Finance Committee will meet on the 28th of the month to discuss the items up for review, which I am going to present now under new business. A first reading is hereby made for the approval of the following supplemental appropriation, $18,050 to be appropriated from the CPA Reserve for Historic Preservation, $18,050 to be appropriated to Old Town Hall facade restoration, Phase 1 safety netting and roof repair, $18,050 for the following purpose: for the purchase and installation of safety netting on the facade and to conduct repairs of the slate roof of the historic Old Town Hall. Secondly, a supplemental appropriation request is hereby requested. The amount requested is $261,000 to be appropriated from CPA Reserve for Open Space, $113,259.05, and from the CPA Reserve Fund, $147,740.95, for the total of $261,000 to be appropriated to the Nashwanak Pond Dredging Sediment Basin account, $261,000. The amounts requested for the following purpose: for capital improvements to preserve Nashwanak Pond by rehabilitation through dredging and reconstruction of the Broadbrook and Whitebrook sedimentation basins. Lastly, a supplemental appropriation request is hereby requested. The amount is $21,651 to be appropriated from the CPA Reserve Fund, $21,651 to be appropriated to Maple Street Elementary School Playground, $21,651. The amounts requested will be used for following purpose: for the purchase and installation of the ADA compliant playground structure, resilient surfacing, and ramps for the Maple Street Elementary School. I would request that a Finance Committee send all these members, no. Chair by Robert's rules is not supposed to make motions, so would you move these to committee, Councilor Kuzinski?
Make a motion to move the aforesaid items to the Finance Committee.
Second.
We have a motion to send these to Finance Committee. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I would also like a motion to set public hearings for the aforementioned items for the first meeting in September. There is an urgency to 2 of them, so so we would like to, well, all of them, because they want to try and get them done before the winter.
I move to set the 2 urgent items defined as all three items for a public hearing in the first meeting in
September 4th.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That concludes finance. Public safety, Council Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the meeting. We met last night, but first, I want to make a motion to, I want to ask for extension for 90 days for the pedestrian safety review, and the form of the motion.
Second.
We have a motion to extend the pedestrian safety review item under public safety. Do we have any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
So we had a meeting last night that was really a good meeting. The DPW director was there, Joe, and the police chief, Alberti, was there to answer a few questions that we had about the safety of the pedestrian in our city. Some of the residents of our city make some really good questions about speeding in some streets that we have in our city, and the police chief was really clear there was not just in a few. Most of the street we have that issue, but this particular group of residents came for just one street, and we came with a few ideas, and the DPW director was no against it, but basically he was telling us that those ideas that we had cost money, and the budget that DPW have is really tight. But as a committee, we end with this idea of sending a recommendation letter to DPW, the mayor, and the planning board to see what we can do as a city. I mean, we're gonna have we have a few ideas, and that letter we're gonna send it to them, and we're gonna send it to the full city council. That way, you guys can see what was the recommendation of the committee, and that letter is gonna be out probably this week. As soon as we have it, we're gonna present it to everybody with the recommendation of the committee. Saying that. We set a meeting for September 3rd at 6 p.m., rope number 1, and that's concluded.
Thank you very much.
There are a couple of new items that I've requested.
To send it to
They're on the
police safety?
ordinances, aren't they?
Well, I was requesting for public safety to take them up.
Oh, I apologize. So why don't you just send those to committee, Council Gomez? Which ones were they?
They were the outdoor events policy.
The outdoor
and
events
and
policy.
the quadricycle.
And the quadricycles. And in the formal motion, I want to send the adoption of the outdoor events policy and the proposal of the quadricycle ordinance to the Public Safety Committee.
Do I have a second, please?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
concluded.
Thank you. Does that conclude now?
Yep.
You're all set. Ordinance, Councilor Connors.
See. What about the
Those are
crosswalk?
ordinances, I think that's
But
gonna, well, wait a minute.
was
Oh,
traffic
no,
rules
she's
and
right.
orders.
Does,
I could do it.
That was traffic rules and orders.
I'm gonna request that the crosswalk ordinance also go to public safety if you'd make that motion, because it is a traffic rules
Oh,
and
I see it
orders,
now.
okay?
Yes.
So if you'd make that request.
So moved.
So moved. Second. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, so we're sending the crosswalk ordinance to Public Safety Committee. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Now, ordinance. I think we can go, Councilor Connor.
Oh, I got it.
So,
Well, I thought this was arranged pre-hand, so
No,
I'm
I'm
sorry.
we have not, we met on the 14th of July, I believe. And kind of that's where we arrived at the things that we talked about today. We're gonna be continuing those, however, so the next meeting we have is next Tuesday, the, whatever the math is on
13th.
that, 13th. So for all of these, the cannabis equity we talked about, we have not made any decisions on the Board of Public Works issue, so I will set an extension for that for 90 days. on
Set the form of a motion.
I'll make a motion to extend that 90 days on the Chapter 2, Division 6, Board of Public Works.
Second.
We have any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor for the extension? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
The bicycle thing, I'm gonna extend that. I'd like to make a motion to extend that 90 days.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Actually, I'll just do these all in a motion. Wage theft ordinance, I'd make a motion for that. Make a motion for adult use cannabis establishment. Make a motion for proposed city ordinances open consumption of alcohol and cannabis. And request to review on-off street parking. All of those add 90 days to those in a form of a motion.
Second.
Any further discussion on the motion to extend those items? If not, all in favor?
Aye, except I abstain on the cannabis item.
Or do an extension of the cannabis item, please note. Any?
I think that was everything that we have no further updates on anything in our next meeting is next
We
Tuesday.
have two new business, but I also wanted to comment that you do have a meeting scheduled for the 27th, because I was doing a charter meeting that night and I'm gonna make it a different room. I would think you would probably want it if you want to announce
Yeah,
it
we
this
do.
evening.
Okay, so we always have one every couple of weeks, right?
Correct, although the
So,
summer-
I'm sorry, what is next Tuesday?
The 13th and the
13th,
27th.
and then another meeting on the 27th. I
Okay.
don't even drink.
Maybe you should.
So that's when our next meetings are
At
gonna
5:15,
be. And
So what do we have left to move?
is there anything that I need to move to
I didn't think
ordinance?
so. I wasn't
don't
aware
think
of
so.
that.
The quadricycle ordinance went to.
That went to public
Safety,
All right.
safety.
And
I think rules should
How
take
about the,
park grant acquisition.
Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, what's that? Or is
That's
that
a
gonna go
resolution to go to rules.
Okay,
And I think the park grant acquisition,
okay, Rob.
it could. I don't think I want to send it to ordinance.
All right, then, then
You
let
wanna
me,
do that,
I'll just
Jay?
say
Wait,
that
for the
thus
park grant?
concludes.
Shouldn't that be Whitman's
Conservation
property? Am I-
Oh,
why would that be-
conservation.
Yeah, he's gonna do
Yeah.
that, I'm sorry, my mistake.
Oh.
My mistake.
Property.
So that concludes property, Counselor Krasinski, and you will need to move the park grant acquisition to your committee.
Right. So, we'd like to request a 90-day extension for the request to evaluate city-owned property locations for the dog park.
Second, although I do believe that we did that.
We did the other one, the first item.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
we did
Oh,
the
okay, we did
We
the
did
first, I'm
that.
sorry, I just heard
Yep,
city-owned
the
property.
second item is the one that I'm moving.
Yeah, okay.
Second.
Well, we have July 31st for the first item, so they both need 90 days.
I believe the other one was previously extended, was it not?
It's all taken care of.
Okay.
It says 7/31/19 on my agenda, so.
It does, yeah.
Which Justin flew by.
You made a mistake, are you kidding?
Yeah,
All right, so do we have
moving right
clarity?
along, we have a vote.
Why don't we put 90 days for both, just to be sure that we have enough time? Is that
That's-
okay, in your motion?
Absolutely fine.
Second.
All in favor of extending those two items on their property for 90 days?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
We have a conservation restriction that was just given to us on the East Street Park grant acquisition. There's two conservation restrictions, the total about 72 pages. I hope we can get through them quickly and deal with this on the 28th perhaps.
Or you wanna send it to committee
Wednesday.
first?
You're gonna send it to subcommittee first?
I will, sure, let's send it
Okay.
to subcommittee, move to send to property.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Now that it's there, are we available on the 28th, Ms.?
We're
Who's
meeting
there?
at 5, so if you
At
can.
6 something.
The 28th,
Yeah,
which is a
Wednesday.
it's a Wednesday evening.
I am not that day, I apologize.
We have the 21st.
What about, I could probably be available, does it have to be a Wednesday? Could you do, what about the 29th?
29th, looks good to me.
I'm trying to be on the 27th, so.
No, we're not, yeah, we're not doing it.
Is the 29th available for you, share?
29th is great if that works for you guys.
Sure, what,
So,
just like 5?
Can we do 6?
6 o'clock
6
on the
o'clock,
29th.
sorry. That should work.
Good,
So property will be meeting on the 29th at 6 p.m.
and that concludes.
All right, rules of government relations, Counselor Peak, I'm gonna do present.
Yeah, why don't you do your?
All right. Counselors, Maria is here, sorry you waited so long. We're gonna send to committee the resolution on the U.S. Joint Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I promised to do this evening in honor of the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is something that we don't usually do with regard to national importance, but we've been doing it lately, and given the nature of our federal government and the person in charge, I think it's appropriate for a lot of communities to back this treaty. So I would like to make a motion to send it to the Rules Committee for further review.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Aye. I shouldn't have made that motion, but so what? Okay, so Counselor Peak, anything else?
Yeah, I have two things. The first is, so now that we've done the 2 votes in 2 separate fiscal years, the voters need to authorize a municipal light plan.
I have a question on that. Why do we need to review that? Barbara usually sets the ballot questions. Do you need?
But we need to take a motion to put a non-binding
All
policy
right,
question
good.
on the
You give me
ballot.
the exact wording and vote it.
Yeah.
Okay, when's
So-
the deadline?
We'd probably have to get it in by the second meeting in September, so it can go on the ballot for October 1st.
That's,
Yes, the actual deadline is October 2nd.
okay, so the
last-
18th is when we'd have to get it to.
Yeah, barring us holding a special meeting, which I don't think anyone wants to do, so.
Okay. So you wanna send that?
Yeah, so I'd like to send that. I've got some proposed language here, which is basically the exact same language. I would like to have the city solicitor look at this to make sure that that this is what the the Department of Utilities and whatnot would find acceptable.
You mean the language for the ballot?
The language for the ballot question.
I have no problem as acting president that you do that. I think that's appropriate to
Right.
get, it's a ballot question, so I would imagine that the clerk would want that anyway.
However you vote it is what I'm putting on.
Okay.
So yeah,
Send it to-
so yeah, we'll work that out. But yeah, so cool. That's one thing. I'd like to make a motion to send that to rules.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. I also have another thing which I introduced, and I want to just take a second here. I know it's getting late. I had been thinking for a while that the workload in some of the committees is not super balanced. That's sometimes fine because some people have busier schedules than others. But I do sometimes worry that we have some people who are just swamped with these huge backlogs of things, while other really talented people could be maybe working through some of that stuff. So I put together a proposal for a committee realignment that it sort of shifts workloads from some committees to others. It actually splits ordinance into 2 committees, and then takes. But I have all the language here. You can read it. But the idea of this is, the reason I'm introducing it now is with the idea that there'd probably be a lot of thought and some discussions, and the best time for us to actually implement something like this, if we choose to do it, would be the end of this year, so that when next year, whoever is lucky enough to win re-election, when it comes time to form the new committees, we can actually make this effective as of then. So I'm introducing it now with not any particular rush, but with the hope of us having some good conversations about this through the fall, and then either deciding not to do it or deciding to put it in this or some amended form forward in one of the meetings in December.
That's a good timeline, I agree.
So that's just why I'm introducing it now. Unless anyone has any questions, I would make a motion to send it to rules.
Second.
We have a motion to send that to rules. Does any further discussion? All in favor? Sorry.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say this is an exceptional idea. I think that, as I can certainly attest to, and potentially my fellow committee member, Councilor Cobb, can attest to, that ordinance has been very, very busy, as have certain other committees, at the exception of others where there does seem to be a disproportionate kind of distribution of the work. And that's not casting dispersions, it's more that we need to rethink about how we can all do this in an even more equitable manner. So great idea, I applaud you.
As the longest serving member of the council, and Councilor McCoy being on the committee, I think it's great that we will be able to add input, because that very question. I've always wondered about it, but ordinances, winter ordinance, et cetera, so it's a great idea. So we have the motion on the floor. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
And so this is going to rules?
Yes.
Yes, it went to roll.
It went to.
When's your meeting?
Is that all?
We don't have a meeting scheduled right now, and I don't want to schedule one until I can get in touch with President McCoy, who's currently indisposed. So
Fortunately, he had a sudden death in the family.
it's very sad.
We're thinking of him.
So, you know, once we get back, we'll schedule a meeting. Once we can.
Probably on September 4th, we'll schedule meetings and we can get it done. Certainly by the 18th, we can get something.
Great.
We have a resolution?
I sent it to rules.
Right.
I made the mistake
Can
of taking the motion.
Oh, so should I make the motion? Just to
I
make it
did
clear?
already, don't worry about it.
All right, whatever. Cool. Well, this concludes.
Charter review.
But I just wanted a resolution against abuse to migrant children.
We
It's
already,
not
we
on-
sent that
Was
last
sent, right,
time.
but we didn't vote on it. We were
Yeah,
gonna
we
bring
did.
it forward here.
Oh, I thought we, right when that was presented, I thought we.
We sent it to
Oh,
rules.
well then, to send it to rules.
It hasn't been sent- it
It's
hasn't
in
been
rules.
sent.
We'd like
Signed agenda,
to
right.
suggest we bring it out of rules
Did
on the
rules
table.
meet on
Rules
this
has
item?
not met.
So we
So-
can't.
So,
We will do it.
suspend.
I don't want to do it because I have no idea. I wasn't here for this, so I'd like to inform myself. I'm sorry, Councilor
Great.
Woods.
Okay.
Yes, my
Wanted to move it
apologies.
forward.
All right.
Agreed.
We will get it done for the second meeting in September.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay, so this concludes.
Charter review, I wanted to report to all of you that we sent 5 articles to the city attorney. I will be asking him to put our need for opinion behind the need for the ordinances, because I know they're more urgent. We will be meeting on August 27th at 6:30 PM. I just changed my mind because counselors who are on the ordinance committee may want to attend. And it will take place in conference room B. But I've got at least 6 members able to meet and hopefully be short enough to get the last few articles finalized to send them to the city attorney. My hope for the timeline is that it'll come back from the city attorney. And unless he says you can't do this entire thing, whatever it is, I don't feel the Charter Review Committee will need to meet. We'll send to the full council his amendments and that version. And we'll probably do the red line version that has the changes for the full council to review, and then Barbara will prepare them as an act. This does not want to go, we do not be rushed to get it on any ballot. I suspect that we won't be getting these back from the legislature. And they may say, we want this on the ballot, they may say not, until the middle of the next term, so. That's the timeline. So that concludes that. I have a comment to make before we adjourn. And I'm making this comment because in all transparency and honesty, it was I, along with Councilor Gomez, and I'm sure he'll back me up, who asked that the city attorney review these ordinances. And I have a comment on that. Fellow councilors, from time to time, it is necessary that we review our procedures. We have of late seen many ordinances requested to be adopted by this council. This is by far, in my long tenure on the council, the most active and aggressive council term in memory. With many ordinances being requested, especially by our new members, it is in this councilor's view important to step back a moment and realize what the consequences of passing ordinances are for our city and why city attorney review is vital. Any ordinance that directly regulates persons in our city, businesses, or those wishing to do business in the city, regardless of complexity or controversy, is law that requires enforcement. Such enforcement may end up in court, and the liability for the city and its taxpayers must be protected by legal review. Imagine the possibility that our city attorney should have to defend an ordinance passed this term that he didn't even give an opinion on. Yes, we have passed ordinances in the past without review, like the pay plan and city administrative ordinances, but those are rare. I also realize that we have in the past not always trusted our former city attorney opinion, but it is all we have to rely on when it comes to this liability. Our current city attorney has proven how very thorough and definitive his opinions are, with in-depth research regarding compliance with our charter, state and federal law, and our Constitution, guiding his decisions. See the recently passed Welcoming and Trust Ordinance and his review, which was excellent. Therefore, it is the opinion of this council that we should not place any regulatory ordinance on a council public hearing docket until it has been reviewed by the city attorney and amended in committee to meet that review. Moving forward, I do hope we can continue this procedural practice. I wanted to state that because I was the one responsible along, and Councilor Gomez also agreed that these major ordinances get reviewed by the city attorney. We don't want to start a precedent in practice of not having that done. Thank you. Is there anything else for this evening? Thank you for your patience. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Do you have anything to, we don't have anything to sign, guys. This is great.
Here, you can pass that.